2018 Selectmen's meeting. We announce at the beginning of every meeting that we're being video recorded, just so everybody's aware of that. And we also take a moment at the beginning of our meetings to express our appreciation for all of the service people that are serving around the world for the United States. Thank you. Let's see, we start with a notice of a date change. Warrant hearing scheduled for Tuesday, March 27 at 7:30 p.m. Okay.
Timely notice.
So we're starting with an appointment tonight with Barbara Gips, Senior Housing Survey Discussion. You can stay there if you want, but you need a microphone. And Barbara, can you hold on just a second?
Yes.
I realized that Chris just told me I was supposed to interrupt.
Barbara's on, and then we'll take care of
Okay.
Good.
All right, go ahead.
it. Sure? Okay. So the Board of Selectmen asked us to put together a senior housing questionnaire that went to all the seniors in town. And so the couple things that we were can you hear me? A couple of things that we were looking at into the objectives of the research were understand what seniors' current living situation is, their interest in senior living in housing in Medfield, and including timing and when they want to move, reasons why they want to move, and for those who don't want to move, why they want to stay in town, and see what kind of housing people desire, the style of the house, the features they want, the pricing that they want, and the locations that are the most appeal to them. So I have given you each a copy of the questionnaire and the research proposal. And what I'm looking for tonight or sometime soon is approval on the amount of money that we've proposed and the objectives and the timing and everything else that we've proposed. It's a second section there. The questionnaire will be printed on 17 by 11 paper, so what you see is 6 pages will be a 4-page booklet, and it will be numbered. We have pre-tested it. It comes out to no more than 15 minutes if you go all the way through it, and if you terminate it, I'm sorry, that's a bad word. It's a marketing research word, terminate. If you stop the questionnaire partway through, it should take you far less. There are a sample of 1,500 senior households with at least one member over 55, and we will be getting the sample from Carol Mayer, who will be providing us with the census data. When I say the booklet form, it's going to be a mailed survey as opposed to an online survey. First of all, we don't have anyone's email addresses. On the census data, you only collect email addresses if you have a dog. So I have no idea how representative that is.
That's something we should add. If
It's on the
legal,
back
we should
page.
ask it in the census every year.
It's on the back page, and if you have a dog, you have to put in your email address. Anyway. So Carol will be providing us to that. We are expecting of the 1,500 households, a 30% response rate, hopefully more than that. That'll give us 450 people, which is enough to do a statistically significant testing on the results. We're using an outside firm called Audience Research and Analysis, who I've worked with for 19 years. And they're going to handle the printing, the mailing, the data entry, and they'll be providing us with the crosstab data and the raw data in Excel. So we can do that. We'll be doing 2 mailings. The first one will go to all 1,500 households, and the second will go to people who haven't responded to the first survey. So the research company will be coding them with numbers so that they know who responded and who did not respond. Everything will be kept confidential. Only the research firm will know who returned what, so we on the team will not have that. The estimated timing is around 11 weeks, and that all depends on how quickly everything comes back and what my workload is at the time the data comes back. The estimated costs right now are $11,000, and we'd like to ask for a contingency of $1,000 because if the response rate comes back higher, than the 450 that we're expecting, there are more data entry. If it comes back lower the first round, it's going to be more to mail out the second round. So it's really not an exact science with a mail survey. And who's working on this committee, we're all here tonight. So it's me and Dick Scolari, who's in the back, right there. And we have both done marketing research for our entire career. And Gus Murby and Jack Wolf have also been helping us. And we also plan to do some marketing to get people aware of it. I just talked to Roberta about that, of having signs up at the senior center, in the library, and in the patch.
In the patch, please.
And things like that. So any questions?
For me, Gus, Mike?
No.
Okay.
My only observation is you understand where the expertise in this group is coming from, right? The 2 experts at the start here, so.
So
Is it designed primarily for housing, or is it a general overview of senior living in Medfield?
It starts out with a general overview of senior living and the demographics. And usually that happens at the end of the survey, but we wanted to be able to profile people who wanted to move into senior housing and people who didn't. So we asked those kind of questions up front.
Okay.
So what do we need to do to get this approved?
Where's the money coming from?
I thought it was coming from the housing trust, wasn't it? No?
No.
Selectmen's budget?
I don't know, we'll figure it out, I guess.
Yeah, I'd kind of assumed going, it's a great question, Mike, and I should have asked it earlier.
Is there,
I assumed it was probably coming from the downtown improvement as just part of an overall effort to make things better, but that may not be. I just kind of lapsed into that. I think that's challengeable if,
there is about that amount of money left in that 15,000, because the only thing you've appropriated money for this year is for the garden club. So if you wanted to take it out of there, that would be, what is it,
We have
11,000?
2 more months in the year, though, really, or 3 more months in the year to spend it, so
Yeah,
it's probably as good a place as any.
24 days till spring.
Right. We'll just have to put some of it in the downtown.
Well, it's one of the questions where they would like the senior housing located and close to downtown as possible is one of the choices. Have we covered it?
So I'm fine with that. We don't have any other pending requests from that fund, right? We don't,
Not yet, no.
nothing else has been put in, because last year we appropriated it for the Dwight Derby House.
You did $5,500 for the first year maintenance of the Pocket Park, and then $9,500 for the Dwight Derby House.
And we don't need, the pocket park's all set now, right? We don't need
Yeah.
further
Yeah.
stuff for them, so, okay. Well, I would move then that we support the survey and appropriate the necessary funds up to
Up to 12.
12,000 to fund the cost of the survey.
second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Oh, one thing oh, no, I didn't forget. Okay. All right. Who gets us next?
Pull that vote back, Barbara?
What'd you say?
You said, oh, one thing I forgot.
I didn't forget it.
We need to, okay.
So Barbara, can you just pass your microphone down to the right, please? Thank you.
Yes.
And so now we'll get to,
And I do need the proposal signed at some point. That's probably running with,
I'm sorry, you need a signed copy of what?
I need the proposal signed.
Okay. all
Okay,
right.
and you have a copy of it there. Oh.
Can I sign my copy for you?
I just want to give this as a copy. I just need a copy of anything they sign.
Going up there. Thank you.
Thanks for doing it.
Should I go over here or no?
You can be anywhere you want, as long as you have the microphone.
Okay. I'm used to standing. Thank you. I'm Carol Reed. I've been here before. You've been kind to listen to me. I know it's a busy time of year, and I just wanted to come in and check in during open comment and let you know since we met last and I introduced myself and shared the letter I'd sent to Mike in September. I went and met with the Board of Health. It will be 2 weeks tomorrow, and communicated back and forth with Nancy Bonatti. I should have started by saying I'm here to follow up and update you on my offer to serve as an appointed Board of Health member. So I thought it's getting to be a busy time. I'd come and give you that update, provide you that letter, and ask what the process will be. I was glad to get an email from Nancy today and with the Board of Health agenda for tomorrow night, and I'll be going to the meeting, and that was nice. So I just wanted to ask, Chris was kind enough to talk to me at Rep. Garlick's Forum, so I've been punching away at the to-do list, and I wanted to check in with you all and see if you could move forward and consider to vote for my appointment so I can work to serve. And again, I brought the letter that I had submitted to Mike in September and my resume. So that's why I'm here.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for volunteering. Did we ever hear back from the Board of Health to our inquiries?
I have not,
Okay.
but I just returned today, and I know they are having their meeting tomorrow, so I don't know what their final.
7
The
PM.
fact
Yeah.
that they sent you the agenda is perhaps an indication of their acceptance of your volunteering, so.
Yeah.
So, any questions from Mike or Gus?
I don't have any questions, and
So I don't have questions, but I do want to review the discussion, just again, close the loop. So the discussion we had after you first submitted, first off, I certainly speaking for myself, have absolutely no reservations about you serving on the Board of Health. At the time that we first looked at it, there were 3 members of the Board of Health, two slots of which were filled. The third one of which the Board of Health told us they wanted to reserve that for someone who had a set of skills that you didn't have. We had discussions on the Board of Selectmen. I think it's probably fair to say, because even if you didn't have the skills for that slot, you certainly have skills well-known in town, and the fact that you want to serve, I think, predisposed us to want to do that, except that if that were what we were going to do, then the selectmen have to basically move to increase the Board of Health from 3 to 5. So the question I have is, when you talked with Nancy Benatti, did you get any feedback from the Board of Health, either on their interest in going up to 5, their loss of interest of keeping this slot open for somebody who has skills you don't have? Did you get any? My inclination is I don't want to cross a board if a board has an opinion, but that's absolutely not a reflection on you. That's just,
I understand.
Yeah.
I was under the impression it could be at the selectmen's discretion to appoint up to 5.
I think we can set it at whatever number we want,
That's correct.
right? And to me, I mean, the board has not expressed any opinion at all. And so, I mean, Carol's obviously qualified for this. This is not a magic committee that, if we get another person who wants to do it, we can make it 4, we can make it 5, we can make it 9, we can make it 6, we can make it 11, we can make it 3, we can make it 8. I mean, it's,
3 to 5 actually is the range.
okay, well, we can change that too. couldn't
We have plenty of room.
Yeah, whatever it is. I mean, if we make it 3, we still have 2 more spots, correct?
to make it 5.
What's that?
Make it 5. They have 2.
They have 2, right. It would be 3, and then we could make it 5.
Well, it's just a timing issue if you're inclined to increase it, to make sure you have some people in the waiting, so that you don't end up creating a committee where they can't get a quorum.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that we could increase the size at next week's meeting, right? And then decrease it at the following week's meeting, and then bump it up again, and then bump it down, and, right? I mean, there's no, like, notice and comment period. We don't have to go to, like, the state legislature to get a home rule petition to, right?
Yeah,
Basically, it's a vote of the Board of Selectmen to set the size of the committee.
right.
Okay.
So the
So
only
I'm gonna
point-
move that we appoint Ms. Reed to the Board of Health.
Well,
I want to,
I would just caution you, where it's not on the agenda as an agenda item. She was here, I believe, for citizen comments.
Can we put it on the agenda for next Tuesday?
I can handle that.
That was the appointment to the Board of Health. This original letter is dated September 20th, 2017. We've not heard word one from the Board of Health members
it
about
is on the
this
agenda.
since
It's on the
then.
pending items.
You look at page 2, Mark.
But you have to stay for 2 hours, because we're not going
No, there's no time associated with it. It's a free-floating thing. Annual appointments, Board of Health.
So my only, and again, Carol, this is not a reflection on your request. The only reservation I have is this is a Board of Health that's, it seems like we should hear from the Board of Health on what they would like before we unilaterally make a decision.
Well, I'm going to
We asked.
suggest that they have had 6 months to comment. They're well aware of Ms. Reed's interest. They've communicated with her. They're aware it's been on our agenda. And so I'm sure all of them have our email addresses and phone numbers and addresses, and to the extent they want to communicate with us, they can. I just don't know what the holdup is here. If we find this magical septic consultant they're looking for, I'm sure we can add him or her to the Board of Health as well, but at least over the course of the last 6 months, said magic septic consultant has not yet emerged.
It's an
So do you have a
engineer.
motion then?
If there is a septic consultant out there in the audience who'd like to be in the Board of Health, please let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to move that we appoint Ms. Reed to the Board of Health and thank her for coming once again and for her interest in serving the Board of Health.
Is there a second? All in favor? Yep. Thanks, Carol, for volunteering.
Thank you.
Can we get back to talking about Lot 3, please?
Carol, what's
Thank
your
you.
feelings about Lot 3?
That's what I should have
Yep.
asked her before I
I called the
voted.
meeting tomorrow night. Great. Should I, you're next?
No.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's see, we're having Department Head Budget presentations, and we're starting with John Knapp, Building Commissioner, Inspections, Request for Approval of New Fee Structure. Thanks for coming, John.
Thank you for having me this evening. So you guys have, I'm assuming, reviewed what I have proposed before you. Basically, the big thing that we were trying to do is eliminate coming back at the end of the year for a shortfall. When I first got here, we didn't have a solid number of a budget. So we have looked at it, we've gone over it, we've tweaked it, we've increased fees as necessary. After sitting with the warrant committee and going over to finally come up with a number to finally balance our budget so that we don't come up with a shortfall. Basically an increase of 26,360. So basically what has happened, we've been given X amount of numbers for inspections, and we overrun those inspections for our pay per inspection. So basically we sat down, we came up with numbers to get rid of that shortfall. Along with that, the warrant committee wanted me to look at fees. So then we have before you is an increase on the residential new construction square footage, going from $1 up to $1.50 a square foot. On commercial, going from the $1.50 going up to $2. And then putting a fee on certificate of occupancy, which has to go for basically every new space. On the plumbing side, we're basically just trying to cover the cost again, so we don't come up with a shortfall. Right now, when we send an inspector out, send the plumbing inspector out, we come up on a shortfall on the fees. So to be able to just to cover the expense, we're looking for that increase. So the increase on the residential construction side and commercial for building was basically just to offset our increase on the budget.
I know I have electronic. So what do you currently generate in fees?
Right now, so basically from last year to this year, we're up about 338,000. So over my actual budget, we bring in about 338. We're bringing in 500 and, one second. Last year, we brought in 502,000. This year, we're projecting about 557,000.
And your total budget is 164?
With the new numbers, yes. Before it was 137. Yeah, so my new numbers will be 164.
You more than cover your budget with your fees.
More than enough to cover my budget with the
So,
fees.
and I will say to this, in general, in reviewing this, I don't favor these increases. To me, I don't think we should be having our regulatory people in the position of generating revenue for the town. I mean, your job as the building inspector is to ensure that the buildings are built to code, that they are built appropriately and to protect the health and safety of the people in the town. It's not to use the regulatory authority that we have in the town to extract more money from people. And so I think as long as you're covering your budget, that I don't see any need to increase those fees. And so you're in fact, more than covering your budget. And so I think that's reasonable that you have that offset, but I don't see a need to increase these fees given that your budget is more than covered. So that's my view of it.
Gus? I hadn't looked at it that way originally. But I wasn't thinking you're more than covering your budget. I appreciate Mike's comment.
You need to be concerned about that.
Concerned about what?
At some point, excessive revenues becomes a problem.
Have you looked at this to see if this is a
I
problem?
haven't looked, I'm just making the general observation.
where my head originally went on this is that I'm hoping that we will see an increase in business, in building
In
activity
construction
in
itself.
town. So I wasn't thinking so much of fees on, routine residents of the town, but rather fees associated with new development, of which there are other town expenses that we certainly are dealing with and trying to figure out how to fund.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Mike?
I think you do have to be careful that there are other expenses, for example, there's office space, there's there's staff timing and the town administrator's budget, so it isn't that excessive. But I think if you do jump, and that can fluctuate from year to year depending on your building activity, but I agree with Mike. I don't think an inspection function is designed to make a profit.
I thought we were hearing that it was mainly just covering the fees. The fees were covering the cost of doing it, and that we've been adding money every year to make up the difference.
Well, to the budget, but the budget is much less than the fees that are collected.
Because all
Yeah,
their
the
fees
budget.
go into general revenues and not,
Yes,
and then they come
It's-
back.
It's not like a revolving fund where the money goes in is expended out. The fees that are collected go to the general fund, and then you appropriate a budget at town meeting.
So what, I'm sorry, John, but I thought I
That's
heard
okay.
you say that like the plumbing, that we were running short, and I thought that was because the budget didn't cover the,
We run short as if I have a budget proposed and we get those revenues. And it's a moving target on the wall on how many actual inspections. But when I send the inspector out, if we look at inspection per inspection, send the inspector out, we don't cover that cost sometimes when they go out. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So sitting with the warrant committee going over it, they said, okay, what can we do? Can you look at your fees? And there's only a couple of places that I feel that we can really increase if we did. So that's what I proposed to you before. But yes, if you look at the bottom line of the budget of 164,000 and bringing in over 5 in fees, yeah, we have a difference of about 336,000 that comes in, and that's basically what Michael's pointing out.
so,
It becomes an Emerson issue.
so why, well, so that some of the inspections are covered and some are not, I guess is what you're saying.
Correct.
And the warrant committee asked you to cover the fees, cover the cost of doing business, basically.
Yeah, you kind of offset. It's on new construction, commercial and new construction residential, that the fees would be generated. All the other fees will stay as they were. We won't be increasing for a normal renovation. Those will stay what they were. It was on the new construction side to be able to increase.
Historically, have the fees been going up routinely? When's the last time fees increased? For new construction?
2014 was the last time. We did them when I first came in, and then we re-looked at them again. Again, when I first got here, we looked at the fees and said, okay, we need to make some adjustments. We made adjustments. And then again, we did an audit again. Okay, are we covering fees? Are we covering this? Hey, when this goes out, this particular inspector isn't being covered for him to be sent out for inspection. So we wind up taking a loss on that.
The one thing that was missing from the memo too, you talked about what we were increasing the fees to.
Yep.
I didn't know how big an increase that represented.
50 cents. So it's 50 cents, $1. It used to be $1 in residential. It was going to go to $1.50. On the commercial now, we're $1.50. We were going to $2. I
That's,
apologize. That was my
Yeah,
setup
but-
on
but-
that. I just figured you knew. No,
And John, how do our fees compare to other towns around us?
we're on the higher side.
Okay. Jack, did you have a comment?
I did. John, just a quick clarification on that.
Yep.
You gave us a couple of examples in our discussions in which you indicated there were some towns around here that had fees that were actually a lower structure than ours.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. We're above most of the communities around us on fees.
You are at
We
the
are.
moment. Okay, all right. Okay, so I misunderstood that point. First, let's thank John and his team. I think they do a fine job in representing the town, ensuring our health and safety and ensuring very good building construction and compliance to code. So, John, thank you for that. Secondly, the warrant committee met and looked at this a bit more broadly than you folks are looking at it. As we think about the town, and if we look at this year, we're thinking about the fact that we might have anything between a 7 and 10% increase in our tax rate. Just a potential range, not yet defined, but that's certainly a very substantial increase in the tax rate, a lot of which comes from the schools. Let me add to the question, Mike, if I may, of direct costs. When we build new housing, we bring in school children, okay? School children are a cost that's associated with new housing, associated with providing revenue to the town. We are having something like $1.3 million or $1.4 million increase in our school costs this year. Second piece, the Affordable Housing Trust, for which we're going to borrow $1 million, we'll incur some debt costs on that and debt repayment, all of which I think should be included in this. So looking at it narrowly, just in terms of the permits and not in terms of the overall housing issue that's present in this town and the impact that new housing has, I think is a very narrow way to look at it. I would encourage all of you to really consider the impact that new housing has on our town and the fact that permits are one way to offset the huge costs of growth in the school system, growth in the Affordable Housing Trust, and all the other associated costs. Third, the warrant committee voted unanimously for this, including the fees increase, okay, on it. So it has the full support of the warrant committee in this regard. We would really ask that you do consider it and consider it carefully. The town needs revenue and needs revenue desperately. This is one reasonable source of revenue, and it is a source that contributes to covering the school costs associated with new housing and a source that covers the costs associated with our Affordable Housing Trust. So we would ask for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Mr. Sorrell?
Yeah, perhaps I'm trying to be diplomatic. I wasn't clear enough about this. This is a very clear-cut legal issue between fees and what becomes viewed as taxes. And I understand what you're saying, and maybe in every other state in the country, certainly a lot of them it's handled differently. But you absolutely cannot take into account the kinds of things that Jack is talking about when you're setting fees that you're charging for a particular municipal service, and particular building departments. Building departments are under the microscope when it comes to their budgets. The fact that you are creating any kind of surplus at all is already an issue, and you'll simply make it worse, and it's vulnerable. As far as impact fees, the Greater Franklin Builders Association case disposed of that years ago. You can't do it. Unfortunately, our hands are tied, and it's not even a gray issue in terms of what you can do.
Mark, when you say that we're under the microscope, who's likely at the other end of the microscope looking at these types of things? Is it the builders like you're talking?
It could be.
Okay.
That's what, in Franklin, what happened, they actually tried to impose a separate impact fee because of the impact of schools, et cetera, by building more houses. And the builders got together and brought an action against the town. But there's a whole long line of cases under Emerson versus City of Boston dealing with what's a lawful fee and an illegal tax. And when the fee exceeds the reasonable cost of providing the service, substantially exceeds the reasonable cost, which isn't just the direct cost, it's the indirect cost too, the support in the department and the benefits and all. So there's some wiggle room. But the more excessive it gets, the more problematical it becomes and the more vulnerable you are.
Well, I will just say philosophically, I agree with that case law, and if we are an outlier in the United States, it's to the benefit. I don't, with all respect to the warrant committee and the rest, I don't think we should be asking our regulators, any more than we should be telling the police department, you should write more speeding tickets to generate more revenue, or you should write more parking tickets to generate more revenue. We shouldn't be asking the building inspector to try to extract revenue from doing his job, which is making sure the buildings are built properly. If we need more revenue in the town, we can raise it legitimately through taxes or through rental of town land or through other legitimate direct sources, and not trying to sort of backdoor in through this other, power that really should be reserved for, regulation of health, safety, and welfare. And so I don't say I need to increase it. I'm comfortable with overage, given the fact that it is gonna fluctuate. If you look at it over periods of time, there's years that could be lower and higher, and it all works out in the end. But I mean, with respect to the warrant committee, and I don't favor an increase here.
So in the spirit of this deliberation, not to try to stake a position, let me try to make a counter-argument on 2 points. The first one, Mark, to your point about what is kind of legitimate and what's not. And I confess, I've spent a lot of time with the State Hospital Master Planning Committee, so I'm thinking more infrastructure costs for new residential construction, whether it's on Ice House Road, whether it's on up near the State Hospital. Forget impact like school impact, but are direct associated costs with new construction, like infrastructure costs, is that something that would be a legitimate draw on fees like this?
That is a legitimate draw in your water sewer budget. And typically, there are connection fees, which take into account the added demands on, so yes, it's the same legal analysis, but it has a somewhat different application when you're talking in the water sewer area.
Okay. And the second point, you said the last time these had been raised was in 2014. So in the worst case here, you've got a 50% increase. I'm thinking where my head went with that was, and if I look at the increase in house values, so in other words, the builder that puts up a house in 2018 is putting up a more valuable house than that same house being built in 2014. Probably not 50% more valuable, but in terms of just the principle of the thing. Which basically says if the builder's as successful in 2018 as he would be in 2014, there's a greater profit that comes from that. Is it legitimate to consider any of that piece? This is a fixed fee since 2014 in a real estate market that the prices have been increasing. And Mark's saying no.
Absolutely not.
I mean, I think we
It's
could-
not
we could-
even open to
Strictly
discussion.
cost. Strictly cost.
We could
Okay.
consider the complexity of the inspections. If
Right,
there's additional
exactly.
building code items, if there's more stuff they have to look for,
Yep.
more work to do, you can consider that.
If the legislature were to allow a tax for this to cover the cost, would that be legitimate? In other words, does the legislature have the power to do what the selectmen and the warrant committee are trying to do, but they won't do it because the lobbies that influence building construction have more influence than cities or towns? Would that be a
It's a
safe
taxing-
assumption?
It's a taxing authority issue, so the state can authorize a tax.
So
But at some level, it may even rise to a federal constitutional question as well. There are parallel cases, and in some situations, states themselves have been challenged.
But you said that virtually every other state, they're allowed to require developers to build schools and playgrounds and,
I might have
Put in
overspoken,
roads, yes.
there are certainly some states where that's the approach.
yeah. So it's really a legislative matter at the state level regarding taxation.
Yeah.
And unless the legislature decides to allow cities and towns to generate revenue from a tax, you're stuck because they have more influence with the legislature than cities and towns, basically.
Yep.
So with respect to the warrant committee, I think Mike's right. And fully appreciate the job you guys are trying to do to hold on, but I think Mike's right.
I mean, I don't mean to sandbag you, and I would offer, going forward, if issues arise, that I'm perfectly available to discuss anything like this with your folks.
The warrant committee was not aware of the legal issues and is deeply disappointed at your attendance at this meeting tonight.
Nobody scrounges after money more than I do, and I'm disappointed too, but
First thing, we kill all the lawyers, right? To quote Dick the Butcher, right?
All right.
Say again to John Naff and team, thank you, and John, thank you for trying.
Thank you.
Thank you for, yes, thank you for trying, and thank you for the rest.
Okay.
Anything else about the rest of your budget that you want to tell us about, or?
Warrant Committee voted to change, just a note, Warrant Committee voted to change because there has been, over the years, a pattern of coming in at the last minute, Reserve Committee mess, okay, not anybody's fault. John was discouraged from putting forward the right amount in the budget. We want to correct that, okay, so we agree with John's change in the budget. It was voted unanimously.
I guess the one thing that I would bring up is that we're potentially facing a huge amount of building at the former Medfield State Hospital site and some other places in town, and that how is that going to impact your job and your ability to do your job and these fees?
More inspections. More inspections will come from it. It will have to be revisited again, but until then, I mean, we increased a lot more inspection coverage on this, so the shortfall, where I hope to be, if I have to come back, it's coming back for a lot less than, I mean, some of these was, last year was 12,000, this year we're at 18,000, the year before that was 9,500. Hopefully we'll come back for a shortfall of minor, not to come back and take quite a bit of money from
Yeah,
the,
all
from
right.
the short fund.
And
There
so
is a
your
preference
shortfalls are despite the fact that you're making money for the town through, but
The
it's
money,
just
the
not-
money
it's
that
just
we're
not going to
bringing in
you.
is for next year. It's not something that we see, we get a budget now, it's
Right,
not taking
right,
it from it, so.
Right,
It's a shortfall in the appropriation.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So that was the biggest thing that we wanted to kind of, right off the top, straighten that out, because it's every year I have to come
Yeah,
back.
we have to set you up with a revolving fund like Park and Rec and everybody else has.
But not an enterprise fund, because you can't do that.
Duly noted.
Starting to sound like a lawyer.
All the lawyer talking here, it's just,
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
John.
Thank you.
John, thank you.
Next, we have Maurice Goulet from DPW Director.
No, I'm Stan.
Thanks for coming, Mo.
Sure, just a little bit of an update from probably the last thing you've got.
Thank you.
And Jack, let me give you that.
Thanks. Are you already offended if I were to leave?
Not at all.
We know that you have this well in hand.
Jack, the selectmen are offended.
good, so you're not missing anything.
So I'm looking at the water and sewer budgets tonight, and mostly the sewer budget that changed more than the water one did. But if you look at the water one on the top page, the water budget from the Energy Information Administration, they're looking at a 2.5% increase in electricity costs. And that's what's reflected on that as far as an increase. Training and education, clothing allowance, it's actually for a new employee. And the last item on that one is just a transfer. We haven't had a vehicle and equipment repair line item in our budget. It's always come out of supplies, which doesn't make any sense. So we're trying to transfer money out of water supplies into a line item and called vehicle and equipment repair, so we can kind of keep track of what we're spending on our maintenance on those vehicles. As far as the sewer, the main thing on the sewer, we had spoke in a previous meeting regarding a consultant to come in to act as the chief operator at the wastewater treatment plant. We've had a very difficult time over the years, last couple of years, to try to fill that position. What the warrant committee had suggested we do is take it out of the salary, because that salary was just sitting there. Take the money out of the salary and add everything into consulting services for the contract services for right now. And that if we did hire someone in the meantime, we can, by the Modernization Act, we can put the money back in within a couple months of the end of the fiscal year into salary if we needed to do that. So this is a one-year contract with a consultant. It's been working out well. He's been there for 3 weeks, and it's really started to make some good changes already.
Oh,
So,
good.
but we're still going to be going out to look for a full-time person to fill fill the
Because the
void.
contract's costing us a little bit more than the full-time person.
Well, it's, overall, it's probably a wash. If you look at the salaries, and then you talk about benefits, you talk about OPEB, you talk about all the insurance and everything else costs, those costs are in the town somewhere, but we can't extract that tangibly. So, so to me, I believe it's close to being a wash with that, so.
Oh, okay, that's good to hear.
So those are the really two main, the budgets there. As far as anything else, another vehicle and equipment repair, transfer, same thing with the sewer. Trying to keep track of our vehicle maintenance and the costs of what things are costing us. So, and we're doing a vehicle maintenance and preventive maintenance plan with our GIS and everything moving forward. So it's going to take a few years to get the information to really see where we're at, and but it'll move forward. Do you have any questions on those two budgets?
You sourced something about the, for the electrical increase, you say EIA, what is that?
The U.S. Energy Informational Administration, every year they come out with a forecast of what they look at for forecasted increases, electricity, fuel usage, gas.
So is that a government agency, or what is
It
that?
is.
Okay.
Incidentally, while you talk about electricity, we did get a notice yesterday and a check for SREC on the solar facility at the wastewater treatment plant and at the public safety building. For the third quarter of 17, the wastewater treatment plant was a little over $16,000, and the public safety building was around $3,400. So in the case of the sewer treatment plant, that money will go to the sewer enterprise fund and end up closing to sewer free cash. In the case of the public safety building, it will go to the general fund and close to general fund free cash. I kind of wish we had a mechanism where we could deposit those funds into the departmental budget so they could use them as to offset their electricity budget, but I haven't been able to figure out a way to do it. They do get credit in a reduction in their electric bill for the amount of electricity they're generating, because in effect they're purchasing less electricity than they would if they didn't have the solar facility. The wastewater treatment plant is estimated about 40% of the electricity used by the plant is generated from the solar. The estimate for the public safety building was about 19%. So,
And Mo, the electric numbers you're using here, this is fully recognizing the impact of the electricity that's being generated.
Yes. We did a 40% decrease last year in the budget
Yeah.
for that line item. So we're just trying to keep pace with everything. There are a couple of warrant articles that are coming through for the water capital that I just want to touch base on. You know, we had, one was the Mount Nebo water tank to repaint, repair. That was estimated over the years at about $950,000. We had an inspection done on the inside. It's very difficult for them to do it without having divers go in, just by drones and machines to see what condition. So they feel that it's not as imperative for us to right now to sandblast the inside of the tank. So the cost savings there, but we may have to do it in the near future. So we have time to plan that. I think it's going to be somewhere around $650,000 rather than the $950,000. Also, the design of the iron and manganese tank treatment facility that we're looking at. The design originally was about $874,000, I believe. We're looking at somewhere around $650,000 for that now as well. So, we're in better shape than we at first thought, but it's still going to be a good hit moving forward.
So on Mount Nebo, are you saying that we just won't paint the inside?
So what they suggest, the consultants who did the inspection, they gave us a cost of about $600,000 plus a resident to be there to make sure the work gets done correctly. The outside definitely needs to be sandblasted, fix some blemishes, replace the vent at the top. Any kind of safety features need to be replaced, as one of the ladders, different features on the outside of the tank. The inside of the tank, they still want to paint. They have to coat and paint it and fix, repair minor things, but as far as sandblasting the whole inside, it's not as necessary at this point until we actually drain the tank, figure out and schedule that in the future years.
What's the plan? The bottom of that tank, there was an impeller or something?
Yep,
that mixed-
that's,
what's
it's a
the plan for
valve that needs to be replaced, that was under warranty, so at the same time, when the tank is drained, we'll be able to get that done under warranty, so that's
That gets deferred somewhere out then?
yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, there was some sort of circulator that was gonna get replaced. What-
Yep, that's
is that what you're talking
there's a
about?
valve inside that needs to be replaced, it's under warranty, that once we drain it to do the other repair work, that will be done as well, from another
All
company.
right, all right.
Basically, on Article 36, appropriate funds and authorize filing of NEBO, that's 0 for this year.
No, you gotta do the
No.
outside.
The outside.
650.
We're kind of still working on that because they do have funds in free cash. That one or the other, we could probably finance out of free cash to avoid the borrowing. And the other one probably need the borrowing for.
It's 650 total for the NEBO, I'm sorry, what was the total of the iron magnesium?
650 for the final design.
And does that mean next year we'll be looking for,
The cost of the facility,
to actually build it? But that would be an enterprise fund borrowing.
correct.
There is incidentally, I think Mo told me, was it 250,000?
In the hospital
monthly
tank.
From the hospital water tank. And because that was not an override vote, and because you can repair the tank for, you can borrow up to 20 years to repair the tank, you can use that money for, actually, in this case, you could use it for either project. You could use it for the water tower, you could
If
use
we
it
borrow it
the.
for the same 20-year term.
Yeah, so we have to look at it and decide which one makes more sense, using the 250.
And if we don't use it for this project, we'd still be able to use it in the future, for future projects.
So when you say borrow it for the same 20-year term, that means you're borrowing it for like 17 years because it's the literal same 20-year term? Or
You might not even have to borrow. I mean, if you can borrow for 20 years, you can offset the borrowing using these funds. So you just have to be able to do it, to use the money.
Right, it's gotta be the same, project that's classified as eligible for 20-year borrowing.
Yeah, okay, when you said the same 20 years.
Right.
I mean, we borrowed some money to start with for the hospital water tower that the 250K is left over from. I was just trying to figure out whether you meant the same 20-year window on the initial borrowing, or if you meant it had to be a 20-year.
No, 20 years from now.
And just, Mo, as we're looking at kind of overall capital issues for the town, kind of where are you, from a water and sewer perspective on kind of your capital plan and kind of what you see long-term coming down the road, beyond these two? that seem more
We're, for the water and sewer side, I'm looking for a fixed network for the town. Right now, we are, 6 months, every 6 months, we go out with the van, go out to read all the meters. So that gets downloaded into the machines that we have in the water van. With a fixed network, we will be able to download daily, weekly, and be able to capture either leaks or determine a lot of issues that we can see right up front. Then, some people come in with a water bill or a sewer bill after 6 months, and it's it's $8,000-$10,000, and all that time they didn't, we didn't go out to, because it is time consuming, it is costly to go out to read the meters all the time with the antiquated equipment that we have right now. With the fixed network, we have a mounted antennas in town. We'd be able to cover probably 99% of all meters that we have, that we've done a little study. And I think out of 4,000 meters, we were looking at maybe 29 of the meters they may not be able to read. Doesn't mean they won't. But that's a huge advantage for us to be able to download the information daily and be able to see any kind of distributions in town that don't make sense, and try to take care of issues a lot sooner, especially when we don't do quarterly billing right now. We do biannually. So
You're looking at shifting the quarterly billing, though?
It's not, it wouldn't, we wouldn't have to at this point, but we should look into it in the future, but it's more the fact that we'll be able to see a lot of discrepancies with people's water and sewer usages in real time, rather than having to wait 6 months to see them.
Do you still have any people that are preventing you from swapping out their meters for the new meters?
No, no, I think there's, you know, we have about 100 meters in town that we still need to look at to swap out, but there's a lot of issues with some of the meters. Some are built behind walls, some are built, you know, in places that are almost impossible to get to without ripping half the house apart. So, with that being said, it's more of a, it's more of an issue trying to, you know, who's gonna pay for all those costs, and, you know, but, you know, we are working through it, and little by little we'll get everything accomplished. But I think as we move forward, another part of with the fixed network is the SCADA program. The SCADA program is the security of everything, with all the alarms on all our pumping stations and water system and sewer system. And it's imperative that we upgrade that to where we should be. Again, it's a little antiquated. These systems are antiquated. They were good for the times that they were in, but it's time for us to move forward with those. Especially if we get the treatment plant, the SCADA is imperative to be upgraded.
At the point that you can monitor that, you know, daily or weekly, the quarterly billing, where does the burden?
It's up here. It's up here at Town Hall's.
So that's why I had a feeling. So, and where I'm coming from is we just had a discussion about trying to eke out incremental revenues from increased inspection fees, and I'm sitting there saying as soon as you go to quarterly billing, you're pulling 50% of the revenue every 6 months, forward 3 months.
Yep.
And there's time value to the money, but so once you have the infrastructure in place, it's an administrative question on.
So that's why I didn't jump on it saying that we're going to quarterly billing, because it is.
Mike wasn't smiling when I asked.
It's not my, that's not my call.
He wants to be able to visit us tomorrow.
Okay.
Incidentally, one other thing on the water tower, and I have to give credit to town council on this. In some communities, when they've gone to paint their water tower and they're renting space for cable antennas, the cable company said, well, okay, if you want to paint your water tower, you're going to pay to remove our equipment. You've got to pay to rent the crane to hold the equipment up there while you're repairing and it can be a substantial amount of money. When town council reviewed the leases for these documents, he put in that it was the cable company's responsibility to remove the equipment and to cooperate with the town. So we won't have to pay that expense.
Thank you, Mark.
Well done, Mark.
If we could get Gene Minio in the Arts Council to have like an art competition on the water tower,
There you go.
where you just kind of have people come in and paint on it.
Yes. We actually saved a couple of pieces, of the water tower and offered them to the garden club because they wanted to incorporate some local history into some of their plantings. And we said, well, here's a good opportunity. They're in on the bureau where your files are.
They're
That's those.
incredibly heavy. It's
Yeah.
just phenomenally thick metal.
Yes, it's amazing. That's how thick it is.
Anything else for Mo?
I just have one comment to make, just so that you're aware of street signs in town. We're responsible for all the street signs in town, and what I'm trying to do is I'm meeting with a contractor now just to go over the MUTCD standards of our street signs. I would like to move forward with putting the town seal on all our street signs. They're going to be high reflective signs anyways, but to get the proper measurements of the large letters, the small letters, the lane, road, there's all certain specifications that we should follow. And I'm meeting with someone tomorrow morning, actually, to go over that. So I just wanted to prepare you that you know, it doesn't make sense for us to keep buying street signs that we're going to replace in the future. So I'd like to move forward with that, and just wanted to warn you that there may be new street signs in town in the near future to look at, so no one stole them and replace them with different ones.
What do you do with the old ones?
Yeah.
We'll recycle those, but, you know, we do use them as a backups for right now.
I'd sell them to people in town that might want to buy their.
Frequently, they decorate college dormitory walls, I understand. So
Only the free ones.
don't make them too nice.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not saying the new ones, I'm saying the old ones.
The old ones.
Yeah.
that one other thing that John and I, Mo and I have had discussions about is, you know, if you're familiar with Walpole, they have the blue tape around the poles, and he was contemplating that, and I said, I think you probably ought to consult with the selectmen to see what their take is on it.
It was more of a safety feature.
Yeah.
If you, during the winter, especially when it's dark, trying to find street signs, when you see the strips, as long as they're put in straight, they're not too bad. But I just wanted to, you know, run that by you first. I wasn't going to do that yet until, you know.
Mike just wanted us to have an input on the color.
Well, the first time I saw the Walpole, I said, it takes a bit. I've gotten used to it now, but it is kind of a shocker when you first see them.
So that's taking a back seat right now. But I just wanted to let you know about the signs so that you're not shocked when you see something different out there.
So I guess I had a couple of questions. One is about, we got notice of the dam at Danielson Pond. Is that something that's within your bailiwick, or who's in
So,
charge of dams? And
I kind of took the lead on that, and
Good, thank you.
I contacted a reputable engineering company to kind of come out, talk with us, look at it, and see where we need to be with that, you know, to comply with DCR's non-compliance. So
For people at home that aren't watching, we got a letter from DCR that says that we're out of compliance, the dam's an
Right.
issue, and that it needs to get fixed, and they gave us set dates by which things have to happen.
right, so by July 31st of next year, they want us to be in compliance. So I want to get that done as soon as possible. So I'll be meeting with them probably next week to talk about it, go out, visit the dam, and see where we're at and how much they feel it's going to cost us to come into compliance, and see if we have to do more work in the future and get it all done at once, and that's, you know, just another expense. So just want to be careful of what we do, but we have to make sure we know what we're up against.
One of the things that made me think about was that we've started work on this 20-year capital plan for the town.
Yep.
And clearly, that's a capital expense that we need to be factoring into our capital plan. It hadn't occurred to me that we had such expenses, but
We have
maybe,
two
maybe
registered
for our
dams.
lands, we do have these capital expenses that we need to be factoring into our long-term plans.
We do have two registered dams, one at Danielson Pond and the grist mill. Hinckley is, no, not, what, Kingsbury, yeah. So that one there is also registered with DCR.
I was kind of
Did you
surprised.
say the one at
Yeah.
Vine Brook, down at the?
They only have two registered dams in town.
Yeah, for some reason, the Meeting House Pond
But it's
and
still,
Vine Lake Pond
But
do
we still need to maintain.
yeah, we still need to maintain them
Yes,
regardless of whether
yeah.
they're registered.
But those are the two I would have expected to be subject to state dam regulation, and I would not have expected Danielson's. I think it's only about 2 feet deep. It's not, but you never know. But you're right, we do have to take care of all four.
Are we still doing any pond maintenance? We started doing pond maintenance to try to keep the ponds a little cleaner, and then the Great Recession hit.
I'm gonna be
we
talking
stopped.
with the Conservation Commission, talking with Leslie, and actually she asked me to meet with her on a separate note, so I'll discuss that with her, because I know, you know, we need to talk about that and see where we're at with all the ponds. And as far as the Phillips Street Bridge, just you know, because I know it's been a while, but it was a 16-week project for trying to get that top bridge deck built. So we are in the final stages of that. They're looking at delivery by the end of March. We're looking at April for installation, final inspections from the state. So I'm hoping by the end of April, 1st of May, that everybody will be able to utilize that bridge again.
Oh, great, good.
Unless you want a ribbon cutting ceremony, and we'll close it for a little while longer.
Open it.
So I wanted to give you compliments because of that issue at the intersection of Millbrook and Gun Hill that the person, there was a lot of issues that got raised about that intersection. I gather you fixed it. I haven't been by to see what you did, but you certainly seem to satisfy the resident there
Well,
very
hopefully
well.
that satisfies them, and hopefully it won't get rid of speeding problems altogether, but it does help.
Yeah, there
Thank
was a
you.
speeding issue about people going around the corners, and Mo figured out a way to solve it, so. Anything else for Mo? Thank you very much for coming, sir.
Thank you. Have a great night.
And then, let's see, next, Roberta Lynch, Council on Aging. Thank you for coming, Roberta.
Just a little bit that I'm reading for you. It's Governor Baker's Executive Order 576, addressing aging in Massachusetts. And a new initiative in Massachusetts is dementia-friendly initiative. So you can just take these home and
Thank you.
look at them. This kind of has what we do
Thanks, sir.
in it. So, my budget is not over last year's budget, so how can I,
How'd you do that?
you know,
You're here to discuss your budget because the selectmen want to see any department head who has an addition of personnel in their budget.
oh, okay, I'm on that, all right. So let's talk about Article 15 first, okay, and that is for the expansion of the center. So, the governor's executive order states that we are an aging population. Not only is everybody getting older, but everybody's living longer, and human longevity continues to increase while birth rates are declining. Every day, 10,000 adults in the United States turn 65, and this growth is going to continue until 2035. Massachusetts 65-plus population is expected to be 23% of the total population by 2035. So in Medfield specifically, in 2010, when the last federal census was done, the population of 60-plus in Medfield was 2010. The 2017 census, according to Carol Mayer, our town clerk, was 2,735 people over the age of 60. So far, an incomplete 2018 census shows the 60-plus population 2,761. And when the senior center was built in 2008, we had 1,866 people 60 years and older. So my point is the growth in the older population in Medfield. The center is completely booked out, I'm going to say 95% of the time. All the rooms are built out, and obviously, the three of you were at our celebration, and you saw the support that was there, and the attendance was overwhelming. We have 1,000 active participants at the center, and those are only the people that we can capture when they scan in with our software system. It's not the adult children who come in for assistance with mom and dad, or somebody just walking in for a piece of medical equipment.
So Roberta, how do you define someone as an active participant? What are those 1,000 people? How
Right,
do
so they participate in programming at the center.
Okay,
So it could be coming 5 times a week, it could be coming a couple times a month. It could be the people who come in just to have their taxes done, because we're an AARP tax aid site. So we do about, I don't know, anywhere, say 70 taxes during the course of the year for people. Medical equipment loans, last year I think was like 230 pieces of equipment we loaned out. So one of the points too was that, so I've heard, over the last couple of years with buildings that were built that they planned for the future. And I think it was 2003, the building committee for the center went before town meeting, and they proposed a 13,000 square foot building, and it was immediately defeated. And I think that building was planning for the future. The building that was approved the following year is 7,900 square feet, which is the building that we have now. But obviously, if you're there, if you're at the center, you can see how busy we are, and you can see that we sometimes don't have space. Like the Shine counselor came in Monday. I had a bumper from room to room to room because every room is scheduled out. The Executive Office of Elder Affairs has always recommended 5 square feet per senior. And like I said, in 2003, we proposed that 13,000 square foot building, which would have been planning for the future. And now with the increased longevity and the aging population, I think it's time for us to, think about our future and support Article 15. So that's my concern.
So if you multiply the number of seniors in town times the 5, then how big a
So-
building do you get?
So it's over 13,000 square feet.
Okay.
And Article 15 talks about adding 3,000 square feet, which will give us more space. I think will accommodate what our needs are and will be. And I don't honestly think that probably the town would vote for more than that, but maybe they would, I don't know. But we clearly need more than what we have. We looked into a portable classroom about a year ago, but it doesn't seem to make sense because the cost of that is high in that you have to, if it attaches to the building, you have to extend the sprinkler system, which it's different than putting on an addition. So we looked at putting a sunroom off the back, one of those four-season sunrooms, which maybe would be about $150,000 without the foundation. But I don't think that would give us enough space. So we're gonna see if Article 15 will pass at town meeting.
Have you met with the Permanent Planning and Building Committee?
Well, I was supposed to, but he didn't post his meeting in time, and so it got canceled, and I haven't heard from him since.
When was that?
Well, I was in Virginia, so it was the end of January. No, yeah, I think so. So I'll wait to hear from him.
And Roberta, are you guys asking the town to pay for this, or did I understand that you guys had raised the money to do this yourself?
Oh, we don't have 1.6
Oh, okay.
million.
All right.
Yeah. So the other thing,
But Article 15 is just for
for the
plans.
planning.
right,
So what are the plans gonna cost?
well, I can't answer that. Maybe I can't answer that. Mike, can you help me with that?
Yeah, the way the law works, Mark can correct me on this if I'm wrong, you have to hire a project manager on any project over $1 million, is it? $1.6 million. And this is, I estimated this around $1.5 million, so it's right on the borderline, but you have to hire a project manager, and then the project manager has to assist in the hiring of an architect to prepare the plans. So it's a little more expensive than if you just went out and hired an architect to prepare plans for you. So unless it falls under the guidelines, it probably, I estimated somewhere around $150,000 anyway, just to get preliminary plans done.
And is that money
But
that you
really,
have,
if they,
Roberta?
pardon me,
Is that money that you have?
150,000? Probably.
Because the article is just for plans and the OPM, it's not for the actual expansion.
No, but we could
Right.
amend that.
Yeah, well, the warrant hasn't gone over it, you could, but I think the problem is you don't want to spend $150,000 and then not go ahead with the project.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
it's
if you're
kind
gonna
of
go ahead.
throwing good money after bad. So I think if you are going to spend that amount of money, the town needs to commit itself to going ahead with it. Now, I estimated, it's 3,000 square feet, I estimated at $500 a square foot, covering your hard and soft cost. And that's what it seems to, it sounds outrageous, but that's what it seems to be running for construction these days. And that would be $1.5 million. So, and that's how I got the 150,000. I just took 10%, assuming for the preliminary.
And that's included in this as well, Mike?
No, it's not. No, that would be an addition, yeah.
So the article itself would be asking for 150,000 for FY19?
That was my estimate. They might have to refine it a little bit more to see, but that's my guesstimate, I guess, would be a better word for it. So.
So did you have something in addition to Article 15?
I do, actually.
Personnel.
Pardon me?
Did you have a personnel change? or-
Personnel, yep, So we
Can I
have,
do, before we move off Article
Okay,
15,
sure.
are we taking any action tonight, or is this just you're letting us know?
Well, I know for me, I would like the Permanent Planning and Building Committee to be going forward, if the bylaw is adopted at town meeting this year, it will be required for any building like this. And so, I would like to get their input on it, because I think obviously they will be involved in overseeing the work on the expansion and the bidding and all of that. I would say, in concept, I favor this. I think I would want to understand, from the perspective of planning for the future, whether it's the right amount. In other words, is this the size that you think the town will swallow, or is this the size that somebody picked out as 5 square foot per senior, which strikes me as kind of an arbitrary kind of thing. I'm not sure what kind of data is behind saying that, 5 square feet per senior. I
That's
mean,
EOEA's recommendation.
yeah, but I'm just trying to
their
understand, like,
history
it's a
with senior
government
centers.
recommendation. I don't know that it's anything other than hey, 5 square feet. It sounds like a conveniently round number that may not be tied to any. I mean, how big is the senior center in Boston? I mean,
Did you come up with a needs analysis of what rooms you need and how much space that is to get to the 3,002 or not?
We did, and actually, 2 years ago, when we went before the planning board, because we were attempting to do this 2 years ago, but we told it wasn't our turn by the permanent planning board, Mr. Fellini was on that committee, and he had the architect that did the public safety building do a preliminary drawing of a 3,000 square foot addition. So that's what we were looking towards in terms of 3 classrooms, a large classroom, actually a fitness room, so we can have equipment in there, and then another classroom for programming. So,
Because, I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that we have under discussion right now 2 potential senior housing developments right near the
how
Council on
wonderful
Aging.
is that?
And it is wonderful.
It
I
is
think.
wonderful.
And I-
50% wonderful.
And I hope one or both of them come to fruition. But I mean, my concern with any kind of building project is kind of looking at it in isolation, as opposed to with sort of the overall kind of town building plans. And so my concern would be that we sort of pick 3,000 square feet, but I mean, if I don't want to be back here, I mean, I won't be here, but I won't be back here in 10 years saying, well, we need another 3,000 square feet now, right? Because that 6,000 square feet in 2 chunks will cost more than if you did 6,000 square feet in one shot. And so I think I'd want to understand a little bit more why this is the right size and whether those housing developments, which could well come to fruition in the next 12 to 18 months, whether that might affect kind of the nature of the expansion, if you do something different in light of it, who knows? I mean, it just seems to me that they're pretty big variables. And the other variable is, from a broader town planning perspective, is kind of what's going to be happening with the area by where the Dale Street School is currently. And kind of one of the objectives.
Well, you could move the senior center there, that would be perfect.
Well, yes. I mean, and so what I'm saying is that one of the things we've got to look at overall from a planning perspective is what we're going to do with that spot. And one of the things we hopefully will be doing next year is doing a townwide master plan, which will address kind of the future of these remaining municipal buildings that have not been built in the last 10 or 15 years. And so,
Well, you wouldn't do a satellite center. I mean, you have your senior center down on Ice House Road, and you're not going to have a satellite center. That just, I don't think would work.
no, I know. What I'm saying is that I don't know. I mean, I'm not a planner, and this is not a plan. This is one building addition. And so I think I'd want to get a planning perspective overall if we're looking at this stuff, rather than saying, it's the same discussion I've had with Park and Rec about they want to put their building up at the hospital, and my view of that is we've really got to look seriously about where that goes and what it looks like and how it's going to work out. And a lot of these things depend on what happens with some of these other developments. And so when we're making these kind of long-term construction decisions, it seems like there's a lot in flux right now that we don't know the answer to, and including whether the town passes it or not. I wouldn't want to pass something and then realize 2 years into it, we really should have done more. We have an even further increased senior population.
Well,
We have
I
a
mean,
different need. We have.
That's where we're at right now. We should have back in 2003 gone for the 13,000 square foot building and probably wouldn't be here right now because it had all the components and elements that we're trying to add to it now.
Right. I mean, unfortunately, as we've come to recognize that the time machine option is not on the table, right? So we kind of have to take things where they are. So I mean,
Sure.
again, in concept, I support it. I think, I know that the respite care program factors into this expansion as well.
Sure.
And I think that's an important thing that we do, and I'm in favor of it. And so I'm generally in concept in favor of it. I just need more information about exactly why this particular
So can you
expansion.
email me that specific information so I can do my homework for you?
Sure. I don't know that you're going to be able to do it in the next couple of weeks, but I will email you, the further
Or
questions
what
I have.
more
and-
specifically you're asking
Yeah.
for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I want more information than the EO, or whoever it is, says
EOEA.
5 square feet per senior. I mean, that just strikes me as a kind of bureaucratic thing. I mean, again, if you have some study, where they've done a study that shows here's why it's got to be 5 square feet per senior, fine. I'm guessing there probably isn't. I mean, it sounds like it's one of these things that somebody pulled up at one point and said, yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
like good. Why not 4, 6? 5. It sounds good.
Okay.
Have you
So-
had any input into this study that we talked about earlier for the senior housing?
No, nobody approached me.
That would, it's too bad. Might have been able to get a couple of questions in there dealing with that.
Maybe, but I don't think they were thinking in that direction, though, you know. So the second part is about increasing the respite coordinators' hours from 18 hours a week to 24 hours a week. And just a reminder that the respite program started in 2012. Kathy Powers, who's the coordinator of the respite program, she started in 2012 as the activity assistant under the coordinator, and then when Grace left, Kathy just moved right in, which was a perfect place for her. And but we were 6 months. We were with one client in that program. March 20th, it opened. And I remember calling Emmett, my contact at Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and he just said, Roberta, just wait. And we waited, and now we have a census between 12 and 16 clients. And it's the most remarkable, wonderful program, one of the best programs besides transportation and all the other things we do. But the respite program is just, it's phenomenal. It provides really just supervised socialization. It's not a medical model. It's just dedicated staff being there with people to kind of guide them along their 5.5 hours that they're at the center. It's pretty remarkable. So one of the things, though, we are a contract provider for HESCO. I had a 3-year contract, and then I renewed the contract. I'm thinking of not renewing the contract in October 2018 because most of our participants now are private pay, and they're coming from their physicians, from the neurologist, from case managers. We're getting a lot of referrals that way that I don't really need I don't need the extra work associated with being a contract provider for HESCO. My pages are out of order here.
What percent of your slots are for Medfield residents?
So in my narrative on my budget, I say that so far in the 6 years that we've been open, we've served 60 families. And 26 families are from Medfield. 6 families have adult children in own homes in Medfield, but their parents live in surrounding communities. And then the remainder, 28, are out-of-town families. And our out-of-town guests pay more per visit than a Medfield resident.
And do those communities contribute anything to the program?
No, the communities do not. And I knew you were going to ask me this, and I thought of this, because when you look at the Medfield Public Library, people from out of town come to the Medfield Public Library, but their towns aren't contributing to the Medfield Public Library. I know when Millis had their older library, many, many Millis people came to Medfield because it was a much nicer library. So I knew you were going to say that, and I thought of that. So, got you there.
You gotta come up with some new material, Mike.
But
Getting too
Sorry.
predictable.
sorry about that, but the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter, in my opinion, because I had a mom with Alzheimer's, but people who are in that caregiving role really need the help. And the literature, and I believe this to be true because it's evidenced in our program, 2 days of respite care gives a caregiver enough break from what they're doing that they can continue to do what they're doing for longer, which means that their loved one stays out of a long-term care facility or a memory unit, which I, since August, have been working at a memory unit every other weekend. And I am so happy that we're able to have this program because I actually see it every other weekend. And if you can keep your loved one out of an environment like that, which is supportive and caring and kind, but it's not home. So this program just provides so much. And if we're helping somebody in Natick, Wellesley, Norfolk, Walpole, if we're helping families there, well, that's why people make donations. We just had one of our families from Natick just made a $500 donation to the club for the program, and she'd only been her husband had only been a member for, I think, 2 months. So it's a very beneficial program. And yes, so part of the expansion to the center would be for a larger space for respite, but then that opens up 2 other classrooms for programming because they use 2 classrooms. Anyhow, getting back to Kathy. So I want to increase. Kathy works at home. She works, I find her, because I go to work on the weekends, I find her at the center on the weekends doing what she does. She does planning, assessing clients, following up on clients, preparing required reports, maintaining client census, and monthly invoicing. She works these additional hours at home or at the center on weekends. And I think it's important for my staff. I have great staff, by the way, and I want my staff to be compensated and acknowledged for the time they put in. She puts in so much time. She's phenomenal. So, the finances. Fiscal year 17 income was for that program was $58,095. The actual salary expense for the 2 staff people was $38,353. Other expenses for activities and that sort of thing was $3,246. So, not that I'm not in there to make money at the Council on Aging, but we did turn a profit of $16,496, which goes into our revolving account. So the additional 6 hours will add $7,787 to Kathy's salary. So I know that bumping her up to 24 hours, she's eligible for benefits. I get that. We have funding if we needed to help with the benefits. If she needed benefits, she tells me she does not need health insurance at this time. But she deserves to be compensated for what she works. And having her there 3 days a week, 2 hours of administrative time is not enough for what she does. So should have her 2 days where she's with her club members, and then the 3rd day would be for planning, client finding, because we have a wait list, working with families, invoicing, billing, so forth and so on.
Club runs 2 days a week.
Yes, and people want it 3 days a week. But we can't.
Why can't you?
No space.
Oh.
I got everything. Any questions? Go ahead,
Good.
Gus.
I have good news and bad news, yep.
There you go.
And I'm gonna go all the way back to the expansion
Oh, yeah.
and cover all of it. So first off, I think you're right about the trends in the population, that as a town, we need to recognize the shift in the population, and we should be thoughtful about what we can do. You heard me at the celebration. My point of reference was my hometown when my mother was getting up in years, and I think our whole program, I think the facility, I think the way you do this is, if it's not the best in this whole region, I just haven't heard about anything that's any better. And in the broader scheme of things about making life better for people in a town, we usually talk finance, we talk all that stuff, but at the root of it all, if you have a town that's driven by people who are trying to do good things for the people in the town or the people outside the town that need help, that's kind of like the kind of town we all ought to be aspiring to have. So agree with the direction. On the expansion, Mike brought up several things, and actually one of them that I took away that I thought was probably, at least in the long run, an upbeat piece of feedback for you is, if this was a pragmatic mechanical solution, if you were to think about what should it really be, maybe that's something you ought to think about if you haven't already done that. So that's the good news part on the expansion. The two things that jump out for me, number one, I do think it would be important to me to hear from the Permanent Building Committee about where they come out on it. And that's not because I want them to judge about whether seniors in town need something, but I want them to judge in the grand scheme of all the things that we have on the stove, is this the right sequence for this thing relative to everything else? And I'm very sensitive this year in particular to the number of financial demands that I think are going to, Scott makes many of them go away somehow or they evaporate. But the real question for me is not the validity of what you're trying to do, but whether this is the right year to hit the financial side of it. And there's two pieces of that. The Dale Street project is weighing heavily on my mind as the dinosaur that's going to land at some point. And the second thing is our debt levels. It seems to me we have to get out about another 2 years before some of our existing debt really starts to seriously fall off. So, relative to timing of when we take on more debt, that's another piece. So it's kind of, my issues there are practical, not philosophical, and if anything, I think what Mike brought up is make sure this is actually what we really should have. Let me switch over to the respite care in this expansion. So two pieces. First, let's deal with the person.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the personnel board come out on that?
So the personnel board met and they considered two positions that Roberta had put forth. One was increasing the respite person to 18 to 24 hours, and one was the administrative assistant. They voted to support the increase for the respite person from the 18 to 24.
I didn't know that.
Yes. Yeah.
See, it's good you showed up tonight.
But their vote does not authorize that. You need warrant committee approval and Board of Selectmen approval on that as well. So the personnel board is just making a recommendation for approval. They did not support the administrative assistant position, which I know you're disappointed about. And it's not because you don't need it or the validity of needing it. It is the other items elsewhere and other departments that are requesting personnel and items that they felt should be
I will
funded.
keep trying every year.
Oh, you will.
Okay.
So one point about that, and the ALS study committee is probably going to take the lead on this, but I think I heard you say the salary is covered with the respite care program, and you could contribute toward the benefits. In my view, for the respite care program, if it's, I'll talk more generally about the respite care program, but actually the challenge here is to actually cover the benefits, including the long-term obligations. This is a discipline that I think we're in agreement. We want to get the town onto a footing where the town recognizes the full cost of a new person, even though the current benefits go in one bucket and the long-term obligations don't show up anywhere unless we choose to recognize them. But as far as a discipline in town, we actually need to account for all of those costs when we add somebody. And in the case of the respite care program, my quick reaction is, and all of those costs should be covered by the respite care program, even though we don't actually have a method for, in a disciplined way, capturing some of those costs, like the long-term obligations. Here's the thing that troubles me about what you would like to do with the respite care program, and having had two mothers that were handled in two different ways, it's not because I don't think respite care is very important. When you had first come to the warrant committee several years ago for funding, the warrant committee basically agreed philosophically to let you do it, but didn't agree that the taxpayers should pay for it. And that's what you've created.
But they're not paying
I know,
for
I know,
it.
I know. It's tremendous. It's
Okay.
absolutely tremendous. But if the taxpayers are funding an expansion of a building to support that program, I start to get troubled here, because we really, respite care, when a town gets into any service, which is actually a service that's commercially provided, we get into a gray zone which says how much of this service should the town support. In this case, we're not supporting it. It's the people using it are supporting it. I get that. But other than we were supporting it with the allocation of part of a building. The question is, how much of that does the town take on at the expense of taxpayers, when in fact, somewhere out there, there's commercial operators that are providing these kinds of services? So when we say, well, we do it because not everybody can afford the commercial providers, so we're trying to basically help people out, I get that. I think that's how we got to agree with this in the first place. When we start talking about expanding the respite care program, it's not that I know where the line is, but what's in my head is the fact that we can grow it because we're pricing it below market doesn't automatically mean we should grow it, especially if the cost to support that includes some taxpayer-provided funds, in this case, to fund part of an expansion. So I'll shut up. Go ahead.
Well, one other thing about adding on to the building,
Mm-hmm.
you know, is that every time there's an election, which sometimes it's 3 times a year, sometimes it's more than that, all our programs pretty much shut down. So having more space would allow some of our programs to continue, you know, on those days with election. I know that's not a big deal to you, but it is a big deal to the people who come to the
I've been
senior
with you
center.
so far, Roberta. I've been with you so far.
But it is for people who come to the center, you know, when their exercise is canceled because they're voting in the hall, you know, they like roll their eyes. And so we empty all the tables out of the end classrooms and they do their, you know, sometimes they do the exercise down there. It's just a little thing, but, you know, this is their place. This is their second home. And I was going to say something about your, about the respite, but I bet you if you ask those 26 families plus the 6 adult children that live in Medfield who have participated, that they would be overwhelmingly supportive of the
I would
program
have been,
and the
yeah.
expansion because of what it may, you know, do. So if
I would have
if the
too,
governor,
because I wouldn't have spent money on home instead. I would have brought my mother here.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I understand the advantage of it for the
Right.
people who benefit from it. It's who's paying for it. I'm not coming out dead set against all this. What I'm saying is the consideration here is that we are, to one degree, going to go out to taxpayers to fund through taxes, presumably, an expansion of something which has a program benefit to a very small number of people.
but remember, right now, that program only runs 2 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So even the classroom that on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays,
Mm-hmm.
that additional space that we put on will be used for other COA programming. So it's just a small dollar percentage that
That's a
will be
good-
paying
that's
for
a
that
good counter-
space.
That's a good response.
Yes, I've done it twice.
Okay. This isn't the point that we're making a decision anyway, but I wanted you to know my thinking about that, and not because I have a position, it's just that that's the thing that I weigh, is how much of this falls on the taxpayers versus how much of it does not. It's easier to say it's great if it doesn't at all. It's possible to make an argument that it should a little bit, or to some degree. Right now, my thought is that for the respite care, not because it's you looking to add hours, but us trying to figure out the business discipline the town needs to follow in how it accounts for people it adds, you're kind of one of the first couple of guinea pigs that'll be through. ALS may beat you going through the chute, but we have to figure out how we're going to do that, and we have to account for that. And there's these 2 other categories that I think we're going to have to be more mindful of going forward.
So what's the next step with getting approval for increasing Kathy's hours? If the personnel board voted to approve it, recommend it, excuse me, now what's the next step?
Have you been to the warrant committee about it?
No, that's March 8th.
Yeah, that's where you want to
7:15.
go.
So I would suspect that we're gonna ask the warrant committee to figure out how they want to account for those supplement. In the ALS committee, we've got those numbers figured out, at least for purposes of planning. We know how to allocate the benefits costs. And we even have an estimate, believe it or not, for the OPEB costs, about $5,000 a year per person. So the actuaries didn't want to be held to, right now, that's my best plan. It's $5,000 a year per person. So in terms of thinking about what the financial impact is of going from no benefits to benefits, we actually know what those incremental costs are, or at least we have a workable estimate for what they need to be. We just don't know how to actually kind of work them through into the process to hold people accountable. So this is not directed at your increase specifically. It's got to do with, we got to figure out how to do this anytime we add people. So
I mean, Mark, would it be permissible for, I mean, presumably, I mean, she's either gonna get benefits or not, right? And so, would it be permissible for the revolving fund to make a contribution to the general fund in respect of those benefits costs?
I think you're gonna have a lot of department heads looking to set up revolving funds to hire new employees.
There's some provision in the revolving fund statute that requires you actually to take into effect, if you're gonna pay salaries out of it. There is some provision in there that has to be taken into account.
Right, I mean, I think that would be what, I mean, again, putting aside, I don't know the legal niceties of it, but I mean, that would be the way to do it, right? I mean, if putting aside the other things, if you were to have this be a part of the budget, I mean, for a budget supported by the tax levy, you would have $5,000 per employee that would be contributed to the OPEB trust fund, and then you would have, where it's going to be supported by a revolving fund, the revolving fund would make a contribution, probably one piece to the OPEB trust fund, and then one piece just to the general fund to cover the benefits costs for those employees, assuming that's legal under the revolving fund. I think that's how you would do it. I mean, I think that's how you would cover
I
the
don't think
cost.
it wouldn't be all departments either, because in this case, we have a program which is basically a self-supported program.
Right.
With people who are self-supported by that program. So it's not a question of every department creates a revolving fund so they can get out from under the personnel board for hiring. It's like, it's only this kind of a situation where that would apply.
I think any departments that can create self-sustaining programs probably should be more than welcome to
So-
move some
so-
of their current employees to off the.
So actually,
I think John tried.
the language in the statute is revolving fund expenditures shall not be made to pay wages or salaries for full-time employees unless the revolving fund is also charged for the cost of fringe benefits associated with the wages and salaries so paid. So I assume, it doesn't define fringe benefits, but
That would include.
certainly make an argument that that's what we're
So
talking
it
about.
seems like you have to do it if
Yeah,
you're going
right.
to pay wages, so.
Right.
And that would apply to full-time employees, right? Mark?
Once you
You said
hit 20 hours, it's full-time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Although, given that everybody's ignored OPEB for decades, I don't think that they probably intended OPEB to be part of that.
Well, it's because they didn't think of it.
Right. No one was.
Okay.
Anything else for us?
No, sir.
Thank you very much for coming.
Roberta, how's the swimming program working out down there?
Oh, my God, it's fabulous.
It really is.
Oh, it's just booming.
Yeah.
Yeah, they love it.
What about an elder indoor soccer team?
You want to join it?
Lot 3.
He wants to play pickleball.
No,
Laundry is not on the
no.
agenda.
The swimming is great. They love it, yeah.
Now, there's a good example of public-private cooperation.
Oh, yeah, we have a great relationship with the Kingsbury Club.
Club, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Alrighty, have a good night.
Thank you very much. And next, we've got Aaron Okora, IT.
Yeah, hey,
Thanks for coming.
good evening, guys.
Owen.
We're on the hot seat, huh?
I am. How you doing?
How are you?
Good.
We don't
So,
have any self-sustaining programs in IT.
no,
Apparently not.
I can't follow the last act. I've got nothing. So this year, we're hoping to get a network position created on the town side. My position covers both town and schools, and has done so since 2008. And in that time, the only addition we've made to the technology department on the town side has been the hiring of Carlos Dos Santos, who's tech support for the town side. But what we've noticed in more recent years is that, obviously with the explosion of technology on the school side, and equally matched with the explosion of technology on the town side, our ability to meet the needs of the departments and just the workload at this point has just become unbearable.
What's the explosion, what's the technology explosion?
So technology explosion on the town side, Mo was here earlier on, all their SCADA system, like he was referring to at the wastewater treatment plant, we're responsible for maintaining that and keeping that operational. So for example, there's certain duties and tasks that we're responsible for that operate 24/7, that being one of them. So if a pump were to fail or a valve were to shut down, not that I would know how to do anything about it, but the systems that are in place to monitor that physical hardware and pumping systems to alert the appropriate people within the DPW, we have to make sure that those systems are operational 24/7. Equally with public safety, both police and fire, so obviously all cruisers have laptops. This new public safety building, you have a very high-end camera system and card access system, which also feed into their evidence system, which is a completely standalone piece of equipment. If you look, obviously, I'm sure you guys have seen the dispatch center and how technology has increased dramatically in that location. Equally down at the DPW garage, their water systems, how they manage and collect that data. We've just provided them or configured for them, I think it was 14 tablets, which they're now using. So more and more departments are obviously leaning heavily on technology. The building department has just gone to a web-based system. We also work obviously heavily with the assessor and the treasurer. And that's where we've had, obviously some issues with some of the cyber attacks that we've been dealing with. So just the nature of the job and also just the nature of the attacks that we're trying to fend off and deal with week in, week out have changed dramatically. So
Both the buildings that were constructed are quote-unquote smart buildings. Even the lighting at the public safety building has its own server, which we've had cyber issues with. One of the things that Owen's not going to tell you is that he works 24/7. So the last 4 major holidays, we've had a problem at the police station. He's had to come in. We don't have any coverage. He was just in vacation in Ireland and ended up having to work on some network stuff from there. So without another network person, we're either waiting for Owen to be available or counting on him to be available 24/7.
So what's behind my question, it's not directed at you and the job
Sure.
you're doing, but, so the town is moving into all kinds of directions, that are
Yes.
bringing in new and better information technology.
better is debatable.
Okay, presumably there's a reason why we're doing it.
Sure,
And
yeah.
oftentimes with information technology, a big reason is because once you get to doing these things, it does it so much better that you have savings. And I'm
Yes,
not hearing
correct.
savings anywhere in town.
Correct.
About even something like the lighting. Well, if we're increasing our cost by having smart lighting,
Yep.
then maybe we ought to just have stuck with the dumb lighting and not have increased the cost.
I agree totally. Apparently, the lighting is a building code, just to take that point, is a building code requirement now. I would never, in a million years, support a computerized lighting system. I think just the cost is astronomical, but my opinion is.
You're not helping me, Owen.
No, but it's just, there's certain things that, with regard to technology and new buildings, and I'm sure we'll see the same at the new Dale, if and when that gets built, there will be an influx of technology and that we're not looking for, we're not asking for, but it's been mandated. That would
But
be
usually smart technology, let's say in lighting,
Yeah.
it pays for itself because you're saving on electricity, so
I
it's
think
kind
that would
of,
have been accurate pre-LED lighting, to be honest. I mean, like every light switch, a standard light switch here is what, $2, $3? A smart light switch is probably $150, $200. So who's smart?
Why did I ask you to come? No.
well, round it out. How about the school side? Tell
Yeah.
me about the school side.
So on the school side, obviously there has been a number of enhancements to security, so card access again,
Yeah.
cameras. We've also integrated the PA systems in with the cameras and card access. So at the middle school, high school, you can lock down both buildings with a touch of a button. So again, it's just the reliance on technology. The intercoms into the buildings, they're all, everything that we do now is network-based. Even working with Jerry McCarty, all the HVAC systems. So we've had to go out and design and build building control networks that will operate separately from, we'll say, the school and the town internal networks, because where we have, let's say, if we take, for example, the schools, you will have the students on their devices on a particular network. We want to make sure that any of our critical systems, HVAC, building control, that they can't access those systems for obvious reasons. And then the same on the town side, that we'll say if we have vendors coming in to work on the building control, we'll say HVAC or whatever it may be, fire systems, we don't want them potentially infecting our town network and associated files with something that they've brought in on a device that we can't control. And that's also the case, obviously, the public safety building, where we actually have like 5 independent networks operating just within that one building. So as every year progresses, I just see the workload increasing more and more. It makes, I think it's true to say that technology by and large makes the processes far more efficient, and definitely gives departments the scope to improve their efficiency and the workflows that they do. But for the small group of us in the IT, it's just, you need to get this done. It's another task that's put on.
Well, and it's the efficiency that I'm looking for.
Sure, yes.
And I haven't seen much evidence of it. Now, the other argument you could have made was, well, it's not that we're more efficient, but we're so much better at what we do. So we're improving our effectiveness, and that's why you don't see it. And it's like, yeah, but usually the stuff, I think this is a side comment, I guess. I think you're raising an issue, though. We don't actually have anybody in this town making strategic decisions about what information systems or what information technology should be introduced. You're putting it all together, you're safeguarding it, you're fixing it,
Yeah.
you're integrating it.
So for example,
But
on
you're
this-
not making the decision about whether these systems get put in. They're being
Typically
made.
not. And on the school side, what we've done to address that is we've actually set up a technology leadership team.
Okay.
So if there's any decisions, right down to apps, what apps will students use? I would never put myself forth as being someone who can recommend a particular app for the curriculum to teach, just like, we'll say, a particular software that John Aft may want to use, or the assessor, treasurer's department. I may not be the best person to speak to how appropriate a package is for them, but I think it would be helpful if there was a committee or a team who would oversee and look at the various software proposals and directions that we're taking, because there are enormous costs associated with technology, and you have licensing and you have support, and it just goes on and on.
Right.
But I mean, that's one of the things we've done on the school side to address that point that you're making. that-
And we should be doing that on the town side too, you're thinking?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think it would be helpful. Just because, again, as we talk about plans within, we'll say, the Permanent Building Committee and how we design and fund new buildings, there are enormous costs with projects of those natures, the same as with technology. I mean, there's no cheap technology nowadays. Everything is very efficient and it's great and all the bells and whistles. However, there's usually big budget costs associated with implementing those technologies. So I think it would be beneficial to have a committee made up of a good variety of people. You don't need them all technically minded, but who can see and look at what's the benefit of doing this. One of the benefits I think that has come from my position being split with the town and the schools is that I can typically leverage better pricing for the town through my education contacts. So I think there's economies of scale to be reached by more people being aware of what's going on, as opposed to just an individual saying, we need this, we're going to look for it in our budget item, they get it,
Right.
and then I get an email saying, Owen, we need this done. And that, I mean, that does happen on the school side too, I won't lie. It's not common, but these things do happen where I'll be told the vendor's on site and they want to set something up, and I go, that's not fully in agreement with that.
Okay.
Any questions or?
Personnel boards?
Personnel board supported this position.
Owen, how is the staffing budgeted? How's the split? I mean, I know we set up an IT budget that covers Carlos's and
Yeah,
this
so-
new position.
Carlos is funded 100% from the town side, and my salary is funded 100% from the school side.
Okay.
So what we typically try and do is, again, we use it as a sliding scale. So we have just hired a network person on the school side. That's not a year-round position. It's a 9.5-month position to kind of fall in line with the school, because that was badly needed again. And particularly with MCAS coming up and how everything's gone computerized with MCAS, as a department, we're just finding it very hard to cope with the sheer volume of work that's coming in. But one of the things that we have done relative to the servicing the town's needs is utilizing the school IT department and staffing to move people across when we need to get things done. So to say that, I may be funded 100% from the school side, but obviously I do tremendous amount of work on the town side, and the same with Carlos. He does a tremendous amount of work on the school side also. So we do try and move our resources around to meet the need that's occurring on a particular week or a particular time frame, rather than having, top-heavy staff on the town side and maybe on the school side, and then people having a lot of downtime. Again, not all towns do what we're doing. I think this is a good approach to take, where you have one department servicing the needs of both entities.
And this was the first department that we tried to coordinate between the schools and the town, and obviously now we're doing it for facilities. So we're trying to utilize schools and towns to reduce it to one position when possible.
Oh, and where are you guys physically located? Where do you guys have your offices?
So we have a number of data centers, but we're physically located at the middle school. That's where the primary data center is for the schools. And then all the town data center is based over in the public safety facility. And then we have an off-site facility also within the town where we keep all our backups. So again, what we try and do is things like firewalls, switches, all the back-end kind of network pieces. We have a lot of redundancy built in from the school side that we can help out the town, and vice versa. If the school site were to go down, we can route traffic through the town. So again, we're just trying to, I know it's seen as two separate entities, but I see it as one entity. And we try and keep them all very separate in terms of the data security, but then the researches and the knowledge of how these systems operate against one another, we try and keep that all in-house to make sure we're efficient and we keep people with the uptime that they need.
Owen, you mentioned last year that our fiber optic line connecting the town buildings is getting kind of shot.
Yeah.
What's your timetable and a ballpark figure on replacing that?
My sense right now is I actually wouldn't replace it. I wouldn't replace the fiber because Comcast and Verizon provide fiber and Fios service as a contracted service, which has become very, very cheap. We typically roll in the town internet expense with the same pricing that we get on the education side. It's a separate contract, but we leverage that same pricing. So what we have done at all the school buildings is we put individual firewalls at each building. So if we lose our fiber, which we did on South Street 2 years ago when there was that gas explosion or that gas fire, so when the fiber goes down, you basically lose your phone lines, which is a big issue in schools for safety, but you obviously lose your internet activity and connectivity and all those pieces. So by having a firewall at each building on the school side, which is a minimal cost relative to the overall cost of fiber, if that breaks or if it goes down, the onus is on Comcast or Verizon to get out and fix that fiber.
Well, now, they wanted us off their fiber network because they wanted broadband capacity or something.
Comcast, yeah, that was the iNet many, many years, and then they gave us the money for the fiber.
To put the fiber in.
To put the fiber in.
Are you saying now the price has fallen so much that it would make sense for us to subscribe to their what is that, a broadband service? Is
Yeah,
that
so
what they
like,
call
for
it?
example, we have a broadband service or a FiOS service in this building that literally comes into this building, and there's a firewall located here. We also have one over at the public safety building. Again, I would never suggest that we merge those two just because the nature of business in that building is very different from what would occur here and the way that network is structured. But if we had to, let's say if the fiber were to go down between here and public safety, you would lose access to your files because your files are physically stored there right now. But we could create a link through Comcast and Verizon to get you access. And then we could have a discussion of whether we should fix our fiber or not. Because every time there's a fiber break, we're looking anywhere between 5,000 to 7,000 to fix it. Now, I would say to give you an average, we probably have to get the company out here once every 2 years to spend that money. So if you look at $3,000 a year, 3.5, it's not an enormous amount to maintain the system. But I think if that were to start to escalate, and obviously as time goes on and that fiber becomes more brittle, and we may have to look at going through the service side, which again, I think is a lot more palatable and manageable, but from a fiscal lens now than it was, let's say, 5-8 years ago.
Sometimes it pays to wait.
It does, yeah. I mean, I'm not a fan of rushing into things. A lot of other towns rush right into like the latest and greatest.
I hope you're not dealing with the Russians.
Oh.
We already did that.
You remind me of Bitcoin now. I'm all set. All set.
Well, I know how hard you worked when we had those incidents. You were here till 4 a.m. and working around the clock, and I know how willing you are to show up when something is needed. So it's been a great service, and it was really a good prototype for the public facilities.
Yep.
That seems to be working similarly.
Yeah,
so
we've
far.
I mean, again, we have improved our processes as a department over the years. What we have now relative to what we had when I came in 2008 are very, very different. It's a very different department, very different processes.
It's been 10 years.
Yeah.
When Owen first came here, every department was responsible for buying their own technology.
Hmm.
So we didn't have any consistency throughout the departments, even in the same building. So we've taken all of that away, and now it's centralized in the IT department. So it's made it much easier to maintain and keep control of.
And many of them failed to buy their own licensing.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not talk about that either.
In that regard, so.
It was really cheap to have the IT department before Owen got here.
$45,000 in unlicensed products.
That's all?
That's what I said.
You need to keep looking.
That's when I said, right, we're going to work together with the schools to make sure we're in compliance.
So can I ask you about the fleet vehicle management system? What does that do for us?
In the police department side, is that what you're looking at on the?
No, that's
Reflects the
the,
new annual software cost for the fleet vehicle management system.
that's the new People's GIS software that Maurice is putting
yeah.
in, which builds off the People's GIS software we have for the building department. So we added basically a module on it, and that's starting our 20-year capital for fleet maintenance.
That will cover all of the town's vehicles.
Correct. Yep. They're just starting to implement it now.
Are we going to have GPS in our vehicles so we know where they are?
Not yet. That's a discussion to have with Maurice, but that's not part of this. This is just the actual physical maintenance of the vehicles.
I'm just going to put an 800 number on the back of the police car. It says, if you don't like the way I'm driving, call this number.
But then we'll probably have to put electric charging stations in down at the garage. Huh?
Well, yeah, this is looking way down the road, but as these systems get put in place and as we get more proactive about our long-term costs and ongoing costs, I can foresee that we will need to have a programmatic review of which things do we keep, because we're, in a way, as we add this visibility, well, that's good, but we're starting to recognize costs, but as those costs grow up, I don't think it just falls out that says, oh, I guess we just need a whole lot more money. I actually think we're going to wind up doing a programmatic review about what things does this town really want to do and which things doesn't the town want to do. Because we all have to fit what we responsibly maintain and pay for within an envelope of what the taxpayers can reasonably be expected to pay.
Has to be sustainable.
Yeah.
Has to be
Do you
sustainable.
have, do you have a capital plan for the IT infrastructure?
I don't. What I've done is all of our hardware from like the network switch end of things is from Hewlett-Packard, which guarantees the product for life. So I took the approach of buying all HP standardized products throughout schools in town. So that way, if a product fails, which we've had a couple of instances over the years, they'll have a replacement shipped out to us within 24 hours. So from, you probably never will see me looking for a capital request for the actual physical equipment because of how we stay on it. And then what I try and do is with the servers, have everything swapped out every 4 years. So it's a manageable cost. And in some cases, we run servers longer. The only area where we would look for capital funding would be for, let's say, a phone system, which is typically, once every 10 years, every 15 years, and that's a substantial cost. We've just, I think, 4 years ago, replaced the phone system in the town hall and town garage, and it's the same system as what we have in the public safety. So if you dial between the buildings, there's no charge. It's a 4-digit direct dialing, and also across to the schools. Now, we are looking at capital funding for a new phone system for the schools. Again, it's probably 15, 18 years old, I believe, at this point. So
HP is like the LL Bean of network equipment.
yes, yeah.
Yes,
Don't buy it at
Except
a yard
L Bean's
sale.
only a year now.
Right, yes, yeah.
Just, I never realized that.
Yeah, it's, I mean,
Wow.
what I've done is I've actually bought all of our equipment used, because my thinking was there's no point buying it new
Yeah.
at elevated cost, so I buy it from companies that deal with leasing hardware to companies. I buy that equipment from them at practically, it's a third, probably 2/3 less than what I would pay for it if I went to a vendor and bought it new. And we've done that successfully since, started in 2009. We haven't had any major blackouts.
That's great.
And we keep spare parts on site that are compatible with both the town and the school side. And again, I think that's one of the benefits of having that one department, that we can pull resources quickly if we need them.
We've also tried cost savings measures. We've reduced everybody having an individual printer at their desk. Inkjet printers, we're going to our color copiers. We're managing our liability on them.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for coming in.
If you're looking for support for this proposal, I would assume.
We would like to have support. The personnel board supported it, and my initial conversations with the warrant committee is support, but they won't be voting until March 8th on this, when Owen and I go speak to them.
I think I'm supportive of it. I think
Yeah.
we recognize that there's a lot more work to do here over time. For good or for ill, there's a lot more work to do, and it would be nice, it would always be nice whenever you're adding a new position if you could find a position in another department that's not needed anymore, as we have new needs driven by technology. But that's not really your problem. That's our problem, to see if we can find something to offset the increase. But I think this is obviously necessary, and there's only going to be more work to do going forward in this area. So.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Owen. Okay, action items, request to sign contract amendments.
No, we moved
Did
that
you
up
sign
earlier
in,
when
Bill?
Carol Reed was here.
Did you sign in?
We did that earlier.
Come on,
You didn't sign up. Carol came in and signed up.
it's Bill.
After John Knapp,
Did you have something?
I do, yes. I just, further to the comment that you made to John Knapp about preparing for inspection services for the construction of the hospital, I wanted to remind the selectmen that several of the other towns that had hospital redevelopments were surprised by the level of activity that was required at their redevelopments for inspection of the fire safety systems and the sprinkler systems, whatever. So I would make a note that when you get around to talking at some point with the fire department, that you might ask them that same question that you asked John.
And the other thing that we never accomplished was the revision of our bylaws to reflect the things that might
I've been
come
kind
up.
of saving that. I mean, I still have all the old memos with
Yeah,
all of the
and-
things that other towns did.
And the bylaw and charter committee never was interested in
No.
working on that. so
And
that
I
never
would
got
point out the
done.
most important one, I think, still is start and stop times for work. I mean, so far with DCAM, we've managed to negotiate separate times for, almost each project, so it would be 7 o'clock or whatever, and then they'd say, hey, we have to start the truck at 6:30, and we'd say, okay, that's fine. So, but again, it's just something to put on the list of things. That's all.
Thank you. Request to sign contract amendment for Community Opportunities Group, Inc. for the Affordable Housing Consulting Services.
Yes, you should have a copy of the proposal. This is a 25% increase amendment. The Community Opportunities Group has been doing an incredible amount of work on the senior housing articles and working with the Medfield State Hospital, which we did not initially anticipate when we did the contract with them. We would like to keep them on, especially through town meeting, under this contract amendment to work with them on that, and then we'll go out to RFP for a new affordable housing consultant.
I move that we vote to sign the contract amendment.
Second.
All those in favor? Yep.
Chris, where does this funding come from? Is this from the 40,000 that was allocated for a
Correct.
housing specialist? Okay, that's within that budget.
It's within the Board of Selectmen's budget, yeah.
Next, we have a request
Let me
from,
back up. Which, say
So
that
we-
again. I should have asked the question that you just asked, Mike, so.
So last year, in last year's operating budget, we put in money to pay for the affordable housing consultant. And we also funded again for this year. So we're putting that money, we'll pay I think it's a $9,000 amendment, we'll pay for that out of there, and then we will go out and
Other
fund
selectmen's budget.
fund the
Not Not
remainder.
the one that we had already spent.
Not the
No, no,
downtown
no, I'm
improvement
sorry,
budget.
No.
Okay.
I am not stealing the money from that.
We have many, many.
I'm not worried about you. I'm more worried about what we're agreeing to here. Spend it twice in the same meeting.
I know.
Chances are that's negligence,
next item, request from Maurice Goulet.
Yeah.
If I may question, if they're doing some of the work for the master planning hospital committee, whatever, could some of that cost be allocated to as an allowable cost under the share ratio agreement with DCAM?
I don't believe so on that.
I would, I would,
Planning costs for that, any of the planning costs that McCabe's worked on is not a shareable expense under that.
you sure?
Positive. No,
It,
no.
I-
Planning consultants are not a shareable expense.
okay.
Yeah,
That's weird.
Should be.
yeah.
We have a,
It's only maintenance and operations.
we have a request from Maurice Goulet to sign Chapter 90 reimbursement requests in the amount of $17,250 for the Phillips Street Bridge.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. We're asked to vote to sign a grant of location to relocate 2 poles on Hospital Road. Work is necessary to provide clearance for roadway for new residential development, Country Estates.
I move that we sign the Eversource grant of location to relocate the 2 poles on Hospital Road.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. And then we've got 3 items that got added to the agenda. We want to vote to open the 2018 annual town meeting warrant for the purpose of adding an article for the Dale Street School feasibility study, capital budget, and school override.
What does that second one mean? Is that a capital budget override?
Yes.
Yeah, I think in your packet, I've given you 3
Yep.
articles.
Yep.
I had a call last week from Tim Buttfani from the school committee and also the Dale Street School Committee, School Building Committee, requesting that I set up a meeting of the building committee people to discuss how we were going to go about submitting the articles that would be required for the override. In the meantime, I had talked to Mike LaFrancesca, the school business finance and operations director, and we were talking about the best way to write this article, and he suggested that we have this $1.5 million plan that was proposed by the school committee for the Dale Street feasibility project, and that he thought it might be interesting to tie it in with a stabilization fund that is a new concept that it was part of Governor Baker's municipal modernization program. This allows cities and towns to set up a dedicated stabilization fund and to authorize an override to fund it. It's a very unusual concept. It acts almost more like an operating override than it does as a debt exclusion override. What you do is, at town meeting, you would set up the article to establish the municipal stabilization fund, which is this first article on this page. And that would define what the fund could be used for, and it would establish the amount. You would then have a ballot question that would, the voters of the town would determine the amount to be put into this stabilization fund on an annual basis.
It's a dedicated operational override.
Yes. We have dug out all kinds of information because it's, as I said, it's a very new concept. They have IGRs and the legislation on it, and it is somewhat complicated. Then you would appropriate money to it annually. The first year, the appropriating body would be the town meeting. So you would have an article at town meeting to appropriate funds into the stabilization fund. And I believe that's covered under the first article also. Yeah, and to appropriate to said fund a sum of money and determine what manner said sum shall be raised. So that article, first article, covers both the creation of the stabilization fund and the appropriation to the stabilization fund. It requires 2/3. No, it doesn't require 2/3.
The creation of any stabilization,
Requires a 2/3.
the initial creation.
Okay,
The
so
appropriation in doesn't.
the appropriation doesn't. That's another change in the Municipal Modernization Act. It used to be to put money into a stabilization fund required a 2/3 vote, and to take it out required a 2/3 vote. The change now is money can be put in with a majority vote. It still requires a 2/3 vote to take it out. Okay, so then,
Before we get off that one.
Tied to that,
Yeah.
right, then there would have to be an operating override vote to approve the funding for this after town.
So it's an operating override
It
vote?
operates as an operating override, so it's.
The dedicated, you used to be able to do an operating override and in the first year designate where the funds were gonna go, but after that, it went into general revenues. They've now made it so you can, basically, there's a process every year, you, the Board of Selectmen, who under Prop 2.5 are called the appropriating body for reasons that are not clear to me, but anyway, you
We're
would
so
annually appropriate to that stabilization fund. If there were to be a change, then you've got to go back and there's a more complicated process.
So annually, it would be up to the selectmen to decide whether to tap that authorized additional levy amount. And so whereas typically, that would be up to town meeting, right? In other words, if you increase the permanent tax levy, it's up to the town to decide whether to appropriate up to that amount or not, right? You can always spend less than you're authorized to. And so the same is true in this situation. The selectmen then vote annually to tap that $1 million of levy capacity, but the money can only go to the stabilization fund. And so the theory here is that in lieu of doing, I don't mean to interrupt, but I mean, in lieu of doing a debt exclusion for the cost of the Dale Street feasibility study, that we would create this stabilization fund for the purpose of funding our long-term capital expenses in the town, largely the ones identified by Jerry McCarty. The first year of which would be the Dale Street feasibility project. And then going forward, there would be $1 million a year put into that stabilization fund, which would fund the capital needs of the town over that period of time. And then, in the event that we had a year where we raised that $1 million otherwise, you wouldn't necessarily have to tap the levy amount. If you sold a piece of property, you put that money into the fund instead. And part of this, and I'm happy, I had raised this question at one point about needing a funding plan for the capital plan. And I had made a proposal, I think to you, Mike, I don't know who I'd talked to about it, but one way to do it. And then in the course of Mike's discussions with Michael LaFrancesca, Michael had this idea of doing it this way. It would provide a stable source of funding for those capital expenses, and it would avoid the need to borrow and incur interest costs in the future to pay for those capital expenses as they come along, because you would be putting the money in the stabilization fund, and then, you need a new roof, costs $1.5 million or whatever, it would come out of the stabilization fund. And I think Jerry's analysis suggests that an annual amount of $1 million going forward would be sufficient to fund the capital needs that we have.
So why not just run an operating override and to put $1 million into the stabilization fund we have?
Because then in the future, that can be tapped for something other than capital. And what has happened in the past, as you know, is that we have underfunded our capital systematically. And one of the reasons for that is that it's always something that you can chop a little bit off. That in the annual budget back and forth, there's a little extra for the schools, a little extra here. If it's a general operating override, there's no guarantee that you're basically counting on the discipline of the annual budgeting process to make sure you are adequately funding that amount, and at least historically, that process has not successfully resulted in the adequate funding.
So this is a scheme to lock us into making sure that we have $1 million a year that gets put into a stabilization fund.
Yeah.
First off, I will make one philosophical point.
I would call it a
Medfield's
plan.
been here a long time. The buildings are standing, so while we may not have been funding capital at the level that we would like to have funded it at, or that some people think, we actually haven't underfunded our capital. We've just let some buildings go pretty far downhill before we've replaced them.
Well, and this is,
Again, I'm not totally fighting the problem here, but it's like, what we're doing is we're basically locking in $1 million into a stabilization fund as an operating override. So we're actually not going to fund through a debt override, which at least goes back down after you've paid off the debt. We're going to lock this in as $1 million and more tax as a baseline.
There's two answers to that. One, there'd be some procedure to rescind the stabilization fund. To take it off. You could vote it out, or you could vote not to fund it. Or the town meeting, because the town meeting ultimately has to vote the money out by a 2/3 vote. The town meeting could not refuse to vote the money out. One of the biggest problems I see, if you look at Jerry McCarty's capital plan, about 80% of it is for school buildings. And part of the problem, and I discussed this with Lyda Harkins when she was our state representative, and it was when the education reform funding formula was being developed. I said to her, one of the big problems the state and the local cities and towns have is there is no requirement for a school committee to maintain its buildings. In fact, the state had built in a disincentive to maintain your buildings under the old school building bureau, because what happens if the school committee had line item control of the budget. The town meeting could reduce the budget, but they couldn't say where the reduction would be made. That was up to the school committee. So if you gave the school committee a choice to fund a teacher or a psychologist or whatever, or to put money into the maintenance of a building, guess where it was going to go? And that's what happened. And then they let the buildings fall apart, and then they would go to the state and say, well, our building is falling apart, we need a new building. And the state would fund it. And in our case, it used to be 63%. And it built up an $8 billion backlog of projects and that's why they changed from the Bureau to the authority and set up these new procedures. Now we're only eligible for 40% reimbursement. So this way guarantees that the money can only be used to maintain buildings. And my position is, yeah, it'd be nice to build a new Dale Street school, but if you're going to spend $50 million to build a new elementary school and not maintain the buildings you've got, then you're throwing your money away. I think I would rather see us first fix the buildings we've got and make sure they're properly maintained, so that we don't end up building a $50 million school and then letting that one fall apart. And this sort of guarantees that you're going to have the funding there to do that.
So the part that I'm reacting to, though, is, but this is basically a scheme for us to tie our own hands, because we don't have the confidence that either we in future years or our successors in future years will have the discipline to maintain the commitment to funding things.
Yes.
So it's either us tying our own hands because we don't trust ourselves, or it's us tying the hands of people who come after us because we don't trust them. And I look back and say, if I was stepping into this role, dealing with whatever the issues are facing the town in this year, having to live with whatever the infinite wisdom of somebody 15 years ago thought I needed to be bound to do.
You'd be very grateful that they had provided you the resources to address the problems, in my opinion.
I mean,
Maybe or
wouldn't
maybe not.
wouldn't you be
If they had
happier if someone had
provided
done this
these-
20
if
years
they had
ago, Gus?
provided
And
these resources, yes. If they had decided 10 years ago that the resources needed to be dedicated to something different, maybe not. That's my point.
It also addresses voter perceptions that the voters saying the town officials can't be trusted to commit this money long-term. That is actually a perception I've seen play out negatively on some towns on override votes.
I mean, putting aside the perception of it, though, I mean, the reality is that if we accept that Jerry's analysis of the buildings is accurate, now not necessarily that it's exactly $42 million, I mean, it could be 31, it could be 48, I mean, but that it's roughly accurate, that we have over the course of the next 20 years, and again, some of that amount is for Dale Street that you're not going to spend because you can get a new building, some of the amount is for the FAF Center you're not going to spend because you're either going to get a new building or have no building, whatever happens. But that there are those expenses, that there are going to be additional expenses that he's going to identify for the public safety and the other buildings he didn't get to. And to me, you don't have a plan, you don't have a capital plan if all you have is a list of expenses. You don't have any plan for anything if all you have is a list of expenses. And so one way or the other, the only way we have a capital plan is if we have a funding plan associated with it. And so, and some of the needs that he's identified are short-term, they've got to be done in the next few years, and that have built up. And so while I agree with you, the buildings haven't fallen down, that to me is not really the standard, right? I mean, there's a big difference between not falling down and well-maintained. And I think, we've built two really great buildings so far in the past 10 years, municipal buildings, 3 if you count the Council on Aging. And it's in the long run not going to be in our financial interest not to maintain them well. The schools get an enormous amount of use, and the more life we can get out of the schools we've already built, in the long run, there's a greater benefit to taxpayers, right? There's a greater benefit to taxpayers. I mean, the 3 schools were done in 2002. If we can make those 3 schools work until 2050, we're better off than if they kind of gradually dull down and now we need those new schools in 2040, right? I mean, there's just a benefit to extending those. And so one way or the other, we need a funding plan. And this was not what I'd originally suggested, but this was the proposal that Mike and Michael kind of put together with the schools with the idea that they would start it off by, instead of having a debt exclusion for Dale Street, by funding the Dale Street feasibility study through this.
Should we have another stabilization fund for OPEB perhaps for $1 million a year?
I would be all for it, but you keep telling me we don't need to put more money in OPEB, that it's fine and it's just an accounting trick. I mean, I think.
But you see my point. I'm not arguing your concept. I'm arguing the fundamental idea that the way we want to run the government, our own government, is to lock things in It's because apparently we don't have the belief that we have the that we're, you're right, we need a funding plan. If we vet Jerry's projections and he says you need to spend $1 million on capital, then I think you look at that as a policy and say, yes, we do, and we're gonna spend $1 million on capital. As opposed to a mechanism that says, well, just do that once, and then it'll be locked in. And then you'll never be able to think about that again. Or
Well, you
you'll
have to
never
think about it again, because each year you're gonna have to vote to
Vote the
reauthorize.
money.
And so every year, the Board of Selectmen's gonna have to decide, this year, we're gonna raise $1 million in
So
tax
that's the
levy.
part that's getting me confused, because basically if every year the Board of Selectmen are deciding it, I'm not grasping what this is doing. It sounds like it's locking us in, but maybe it's not locking us in.
It's not locking us
No,
in. What
you're
it's,
not
what
locked
it's
in.
saying is that you could do this one of three ways, okay? You could do it the first way, which is what I had suggested, which was to use debt, which Mike and Michael didn't think was a great idea. Second way to do it is to just have an operating override. We're just gonna increase the taxes, and we promise you, we won't underfund our capital going forward. We will spend the level best amount. That's another way to do it. The third way to do it is to say, we're going to have an operating override. It is tied to identified expenses that we know we have, we know are coming. It's gonna cost us something. But if it turns out we don't need that much, we're not gonna tax you that much. But we're committed to doing it.
So,
You give us
okay,
this-
so is
it's not
that
like it's-
operating override a dedicated, so if we were to decide a year later not to put $1 million into the stabilization fund, we put $500,000 in, then the levy actually drops, the levy limit drops down by the
Yes.
$500,000 you're not putting in? Ah.
It is the assessors, we
It's
met
like
with
anything
them
else, it's
on.
levy capacity, right? I mean, you just.
No, not capacity, not the limit,
The
Yes,
limit
it
stays
is.
the same.
And
The
it,
capacity goes, you just don't use all the capacity. So
But
just
do
like
you have
the
the
levy
discretion
limit
to
can be
do that?
42 million, you spend
So-
38 million, you only tax for 38
Here-
million.
here's what I'm,
If you pull out less than there's a bunch of examples that the DOR provided. If you pull out less than the next year, that's as much as you can pull out. They don't, my understanding, however, is if you don't pull out anything, then you go back to the last year that you took out, and that's the most you can take out in the next year that you decide to take out.
So if you ever do less than $1 million, then the next time you do it, you can't go back up to $1 million?
That's my understanding of how they played it out.
Can you send me that? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, they- yeah,
plus, does that change what I'm saying is if
It
you have.
increases, you can increase it for the
Yes.
for 2.5% each year if you do the max.
no. It is, Yvonne dug out a sheet from the tax recap sheet, the levy calculation, and the sheet shows that this money is excluded from the calculation of the levy limit. It is a separate item on your tax
So
levy
it's almost like a
calculation.
debt exclusion that never goes down.
Correct.
Yes.
That's not
Except
tied.
the first year, it's treated as an operating override. But then once,
It's an operating override in that it doesn't go down, it doesn't go away automatically like a debt exclusion. But it's not available to be spent on anything other than. the capital
you said it
stabilization.
doesn't include, it's not included, it's excluded from the
It's
Prop 2.5.
excluded from the calculation of the levy
That's my
limit.
point.
Yeah.
Right, so it's not available for anything else.
Right.
So in that sense, for this $1 million, you are limiting what we can use it for in the future.
And it does not increase your levy by 2.5%.
It's just always.
Let me try,
No.
let me try a different thing. You have a $9 million a year budget, town budget. You pass, you create this stabilization fund and you fund it $1 million. The year that you do that, the taxpayers vote for that $1 million, which is an operating override, because it's more than 2.5% above the, 9 million. The following year, your levy limit remains at 9 million because that million was excluded?
No, your levy limit becomes 9 million plus 9,200,000.
No.
Well,
You get a
but-
2.5% increase in the 9 million.
Just
Well, the 9 million would, that's
Oh, the
over there.
9.
Then you have an
Yeah.
extra million
Yes.
that can be taxed and contributed to the capital stabilization fund.
But where's that million coming from?
Coming from the
So
taxpayers.
so you're passing a second override when you put the next million in? That's what I'm getting at.
It's a
So-
permanent, that's why it's a
No,
permanent,
it's
it's
an
a,
operational
it's a
override.
permanent addition.
So you're,
But a separate, it's a separate
you-
like levy. It's almost like you're creating two different levies.
And that levy never changes.
That levy never changes.
There's a specific paragraph of Prop 2.5 that allows that process, and it's tied in with the stabilization fund, which is a separate statute. So there's an interplay between the two statutes.
This is different than the original Prop 2.5 that had the
Prop
capital.
2.5, if you look
It was
at-
originally a capital, you
No,
could,
there's a bunch of sub-paragraphs in Prop 2.5.
Yeah.
It's actually very complex
yeah,
legislation. There's a bunch of paragraphs that give you various options to basically exclude.
this is the capital expense
so-
exclusion.
So it's more complex than just debt exclusion, operational override. There's other choices in
Right.
there,
Right.
including underride, which you mentioned a
Right.
minute ago. So there's like,
Well, there's a third
Or-
category. There's capital expense exclusion, I think,
Yeah,
is the
that's
third
right.
one.
There's a debt exclusion, there's an operating, there's a capital expense, there's an underride.
Right.
And then this adds a new category. It's a,
So it's not the capital expense
it's
exclusion.
a dedicated stabilization fund that can be funded by an override.
And it doesn't have to just be for capital. I mean, you can conceivably create a stabilization fund for other things and fund it
Yes.
with the same mechanism.
road improvement, for instance, which is a problem in a lot of communities.
Yes. There's some of the other advantages.
You can do it
that-
for
Yes.
state hospital buildings, Bill.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here wondering how you can be concerned about the CPA money being forced into three categories and not having any flexibility there, but you're willing to put $1 million a year into a category that once.
Because we need it. We know we've got a proposal that shows we've got $40 million.
I'm not arguing against the need, I'm
ready.
arguing against
Yeah.
the reservation of money so far in advance with conditions that look like it limits how much you can take out at a future time. I just don't, why you put restrictions on yourself. You're gonna make yourself.
It's not putting restrictions on us. I mean, in other words, there's a specific, we have a need to fund this capital one way or the other. You can do it through reductions in the operating budgets. You can say, look, we have to spend $1 million a year in capital, so we're gonna cut $1 million out of the school budget, right? Or we're gonna cut $1 million out of the town budgets, we're gonna somehow find $1 million in the operating budgets, and we're just gonna fund this out of our ordinary tax levy. That's an option. The other option is to use debt, right? To use debt in some sort of scheduled, timely way to fund the capital as it comes due, right? And so you could have, you'd basically be saying we're going to have, this was kind of along the lines of, my thinking about it was, you're gonna have basically regular votes on this. So every 3 years, we're gonna vote $3 or $4 million, whatever the capital is for the next 3 or 4 years, we're gonna vote a debt exclusion on that amount, we'll bond it over 20 years, and that's how we're gonna do it. So you're gonna have regular votes on that, every 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it is on the overall funding plan.
Which is what you've been doing all along. It's not-
Well, we haven't done it, no, we've never done it.
No,
for
we have
this.
done for capital. I mean.
We've never done, that's what I'm saying, is that this is a new thing that we haven't done, right? So this is money we have not been spending historically, that is not accounted for in our historic budget, but we have a long-term obligation. Look, and I put OPEB in this category, and I've talked for several years about some solution for OPEB, and constantly being told we don't need to do that, we don't need to fund it, we can't bond it, we can't do that, fine. But this is something that we know we have, something that we know we have to do, and we have to find, it's not responsible for us simply to know we have these costs out there and not to find a way to do it. And if people, look, if town meeting gets up there and says, we don't want to do this, we're happy reducing the operating budgets to find an extra $1 million for capital every year, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. I do not think that is what town meeting is going to do. And so we have to create, and it doesn't have to be this way, right? This is up for discussion. This is a proposal.
Yeah.
But to me, to say we have to just, well, we're just going to hope we get it right in the future, we have to have a plan that a financial plan that matches the expenditure plan. Otherwise, you do not have a capital plan and you are not accounting for your capital costs.
So,
Questioning the consistency and the logic. of
But
the
here's the thing,
approach
here's the
that-
difference with the CPA, is the CPA are wants, okay? Maintaining capital buildings to provide core services are needs. And so,
assuming you keep all the, you have to first validate those costs, and then you have to make a hard decision of what you can maintain. It's not just because it's there, it's there.
no, absolutely right. There's some things you're not gonna maintain, some things you're not gonna fund, things you're gonna, I mean, with any 20-year plan, it's not gonna remain constant for 20 years.
So-
But if you're gonna just assume, because what governments do, okay, and this is not necessarily town governments, what governments do is they assume the rosiest financial scenario. So when they do pension benefits, they say, hey, we're going to get a 7.75% return. And they assume in the future, like all these budgets that Washington passes, well, in the future us, they're going to be more disciplined about their budgets than we are. So we're going to project in all these cuts that other people who are not running for re-election next year are going to have. And so you can get these long-term scores about what's going to happen with entitlements, what's going to happen with expenses, and they're ridiculous because they're all presuming that future people are going to have more foresight and courage than current people do. Well, the future people turn out a lot of times to be the same people as the people who were there in the first place. They say, you know what, we're going to give ourselves a pass and vote this by. And so if we are not funding our capital expenses, I think this is Mike's insight, and I agree. If you are not funding expenses that you know you have that are going to come due, it's the same thing as borrowing, because you are putting off costs on future people, future taxpayers that we know are coming. We know it's going to happen. We know at some point you're going to need a new roof on the school. At some point you're going to need something else. Again, I agree with Gus. As part of that capital plan, the capital budget committee, whoever's assigned with it's got to go through, figure out what's in it, what's out, what's going to go, and as you narrow that 20 years down to 5-year windows, you're going to do the same thing. Okay, for the next 5 years, some is in, some is out, and the exact amount is going to change, but directionally, it's more than we currently have budgeted for. And so I'm all ears on other suggestions, but counting on the wisdom of future us is not a plan. It's simply kicking the can down the road and hoping that people in the future will pay for it.
I don't think it's kicking down the road. Much of your commentary, I agree, applies at the federal level. I agree it applies at the state level. I don't accept that it has to apply at the town level.
Right, and so we have to have
we
some
to
sort
do
of
something.
funding mechanism for it
But
going forward.
let's leave, I just have to mull this one over before I even know where I come out. Let's just talk practical. So we need funding for a feasibility study in the coming fiscal year. That estimate is at 1.5 million.
No, Tim Bonfati said he thinks because people will be anxious to get the permanent school building project, they will cut their price. So he has lowered his estimate to $1 million.
Okay. So, but that's just for that feasibility study. That's not even addressing capital expenses.
Yes, that would be the first year of the capital expenditure. The first $1 million would be used to fund the feasibility study.
So how do we fund our capital?
In this, in the succeeding years, the
Oh,
$1 million.
in FY19.
Okay, I'll explain that to you. When we borrowed the money for the school buildings, we borrowed more than we needed under the new formula because we were acting under the old formula, which was the Mass School Building Bureau. When they changed to the Mass School Building Authority, they wanted the debt off the books. So they cleared out all the existing projects, and in our case, they gave us a check for $18 million, which was what they owed us for principal.
Yeah.
We were told that, and we disagreed with this, but we were told by our financial advisor and by the Department of Revenue that we might be subject to arbitrage.
Right.
So we made the decision, rather than to have to come up with a chunk of money to reimburse the the U.S. Treasury for arbitrage, we would hold much of that interest in an account.
Mm-hmm.
In the event we had to pay arbitrage, well, obviously the interest rates have been so low, and there's a whole question whether we were ever going to be subject to arbitrage because we spent the money.
Mm-hmm.
But in any event, we have that money. Because it was school reimbursement, we have used that money only for school projects.
Mm-hmm.
3 years ago, we used it to help fund the Wheelout School boiler replacement project.
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, we used a portion of it to pay for the field and track renovation at the high school.
Okay.
We now have somewhere, I think with the accumulated interest at the end of this fiscal year, we will have around $500,000 in that fund.
Okay.
$18 million earns quite a bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
And my suggestion, because you don't want to use that for an operating expense because then you've dug yourself a hole.
Mm-hmm.
But this money, because 80% of these projects are schools anyway, would be to appropriate that $500,000 to fund the projects for Jerry's capital plan.
Not the feasibility study,
The what?
the school?
Yeah, no, I don't think you can do that. There's some reason. These regulations for school building authority drive you crazy, but
I would think it would be easier to use that money for a school project than it would be for
the
capital.
Jerry's projects are school projects.
Okay, so
School
it's going to
capital.
schools, it's
Yes.
going to schools,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Yeah, the
That would
roofs.
be on top of the 400,000 in the regular capital budget. So
Yeah,
you'd
so-
essentially be spending 900,000.
So that would allow you to begin to addressing some of these needs, which is, he tells me, they can't wait. You know, you've got water coming into the buildings, you've got, it's gonna cost you a lot more if you don't do some of them at least. And
Okay,
he has to give you his priority list. But here's one other thing I wanted to point out. One other advantage of doing this system, since we do have the 20-year capital plan, we're in a rising interest rate environment. If you fund this system the way it's projected, you avoid the interest cost because you're not borrowing the money, and you avoid the financing costs when you do go out and borrow, which can be $75,000 to $100,000 now. So you're getting, in effect, you are avoiding paying interest on these projects. Now, does it cost you more money up front? Yes, because if you borrowed the money for the feasibility study for the first year, you would pay it back over 5 years, and it'd be, you know, $200,000 a year plus interest. This way, you're paying $1 million the first year, but every 3 years, when you go out to borrow the money to fund the capital plan, you're going to have to pay interest, and you're going to have to pay that interest for 20 years. So in effect, when you borrow money for 20 years, you're also doing what you were worried about, locking yourself in for a long time frame and locking
Well, but
future
the flip
leaders.
side is when you take $1 million more from taxpayers, they're not making interest on what they have. You know, we're shifting, the interest side goes from the town side paying for money borrowed to an interest, lost interest because people are paying higher taxes. So it's not like the interest disappeared, it's just that we shifted it from one place to another.
Well, but
You've
if you
shifted
assume
it
that the
forward,
amount you're
yeah.
gonna pay, I mean, assume that the amount you're gonna pay to implement the capital plan is the same, right? If you're funding it up front this way, when it comes time to write the check, you're just writing the check for the cost of that. If you're not doing it up front, if you're borrowing it, when it comes time to write the check is the cost of doing it plus the interest on the cost of that check. I mean, that's the interest and that ultimately, I mean, town government doesn't have any money other than what comes from the taxpayers, right? So the taxpayers would either be, and this is, again, this is doing something, an unusual approach, which I didn't like at first, but an unusual approach for government, which is front-loading the costs for back-ended savings, whereas it's usually the opposite, right? Where you're shorting the front-end cost and you have the back-end expense.
The town is actually paying, you're building the money up before you spend it. right?
Correct.
That's a very prudent way to manage finances in most cases, you just, so, but I want to stay out of that whole mechanism for a minute, because I just have to think about it. It's like, I'm not sure.
We've all
The-
had
the
to do a lot of
question, the
thinking.
thing that I'm trying to figure out is, so we have $1 million school feasibility study that we're funding.
Yeah.
We have, I guess, 900,000 in facilities projects that Jerry tells us.
No, you've got 500,000. The other 400,000 is going for the usual trucks, police cruisers and
Oh,
truck
okay,
replacements.
okay,
Yeah.
so the 500,000 covers the stuff that Jerry says is an emergency.
Yes.
$1 million covers the feasibility plan in the first year. The 400,000 is what we would normally put on the capital expenditure, so that's
Yes.
kind of business as usual.
Yeah.
The biggest impact on all that is we've just added $1 million that we hope the taxpayers will vote by way of an operating override to go in if the stabilization fund. I mean, that's the thing that's the big elephant that's there, is $1 million to put into this, and instead of bonding and paying, bonding and doing a debt override on that $1 million, we're basically saying, no, we want you to pay it up front.
Yes, yeah. Now, you haven't taken away the town meeting's decision-making authority. because they still have to appropriate the money out of that fund.
Out of the stabilization.
But next year, they're gonna throw another million in it.
And they can decide to spend it or not to spend it. They don't have to spend it in any one year. They can
I
say
get
they-
that, I get that, but they're paying for it every year. It's $1 million a year.
Yeah. However, if you go down the road 3 years from now and interest rates have gone up significantly and you're paying interest rates and borrowing costs, in the long run, it's costing you more because that the money that goes into stabilization, if they decide not to use it at any one time, that's invested and adds to the stabilization fund. So you're not only not paying interest, you're earning interest.
And then, Mark, you're saying that if you then, let's say you go 3 years into it, and I'm not quite sure how that first year, the limit works, but let's say 1 year in one of those 3 years, you take out 600,000, there was something about that, then it becomes the limit on what you can take out.
If you put it in other words, if you only tax 600,000 of the million, according to what Mark says, I wanna see the release that, I don't disagree with you, but it seems odd.
Well,
Then
I'm
the
just
next year, you
reading-
can only
yeah.
take out 600,000, you lose the other, it doesn't make sense, but.
You don't lose it, it's just you can't.
You know, you can't tax for it anymore. So in other words, you can tax up to $1 million to put in the stabilization fund. If in some year you decided to do 600,000, what Mark is saying, in the future, the max you can do in a year is 600,000.
That would be an odd result.
Which is an odd result
It's an odd
because
result,
in
although
the
at
normal
least
budget,
that-
you can always spend less than the levy limit,
Yeah.
but the levy limit doesn't change. The
Yeah.
levy limit keeps going up even if you don't spend to it, right?
Well,
Yeah.
because how do you build up a balance? If you can't, if you,
Because
Because
you,
you appropriate each,
To the fund.
appropriate, you, the Board of Selectmen, appropriate to the max each year, and let the fund build up, if that's what you're inclined to do.
Right, so like in year one, you might appropriate $1 million.
well, no, the taxpayers in year one appropriate $1 million when
No,
they.
they vote.
they voted
vote
out.
the levy
You
out.
voted in, they voted out.
Right.
But first of all, the taxpayers pass an override bill.
Mm-hmm.
That, once they've done that, the taxpayers are out of the picture, except to the extent that you need to take money out of the stabilization fund.
And then town meeting has to take it out. So let's say year one, year two, year one, $1 million goes in, $1 million goes out to pay for the feasibility study. Year two, $1 million goes in, and under Jerry's plan, you need 700,000. You take 700,000 out of the stabilization fund, you get 300 left. Year three, you put $1 million in, you get $1.3 million, now it's 600,000, you take out the 6, you got 7 left behind. Year four, it's $1 million, you get $1.7 million. Maybe that year it's only 200, so each year it's building up, and then ideally, you have a plan that, and then this is what we're gonna have, that says, okay, here are the priority items for year 1, 2, 3, and 4. We know in year 5, we got a big ticket items. Year 5, we gotta do the roofs at Blake and Medfield High School. That's a $1.8 million project. You manage that stabilization fund towards the fact that you know in year 5, you're gonna have a roof to do. Which is what we used to do a little bit of that in the existing capital budget. So for example, with roofs, you know, you'd have
Yeah.
$25,000 a year, which I hated when I was in the capital budget committee, $25,000 a year, you know, building up to get to the point if you had to do it, which again, is prudent to do, it's prudent.
You know, without knowing that I fully understand this thing and have digested it, there is one thing I am sure of. Before I would know how I want to make that long-term financial commitment, I would want to see the programming of those long-term financial costs. Because that's, what really you need is that full picture. I mean, totally agree. You want to program roof replacement, you want to replace that all out, and then you have a profile. It's like what water and sewer does, or should do. Once you have that, then there's a question that says, okay, how do we finance this profile? Maybe then this mechanism makes sense.
Right.
Right now, it doesn't, because we're setting the mechanism up and we're funding it at a level before we really know what.
Well, we have the profile, I mean, in the broad strokes that Jerry did it, right? So he broke all his expenses down into 5-year increments. Here, and again, it's like anything else.
It's not I don't think, I'm saying you need to actually have that thing programmed out, not kind of programmed out.
I agree, but I'm saying he's got the first piece of it saying year 1 to 5, year 6 to 10. And I agree with you entirely. You have to map those costs onto the revenues.
So one more question. So in this article, just I want to understand the mechanics in the first year. So in the first year, if this article went in and if it passed, this stabilization fund would be approved by 2/3 majority. $1 million would be put into the stabilization fund What's the mechanism of pulling that out to go put it into the feasibility plan?
That's the second article.
And if you notice, yes, if you notice, the second article is a contingent article, because in order to have that $1 million go in, you have to have the voters approve an operating override.
Okay, or the more straightforward thing in the absence of that full programming is just to have them approve an operating override to cover this in the first year,
Yes.
and you don't have the fund.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, that's the easy part.
Okay.
The hard part is the third article.
It's the shortest one.
That blank's doing a lot of work there, guys.
Oh, sure is. Okay.
When we met, and let me tell you who was at this meeting, because it was Tim that called the meeting, and there was Tim and Chris Morrison from the school committee. Mike was there as a representative for the school, Dale Street School Building Committee. Joy, Yvonne, and Georgia and Matt were there from the finance, because we had to deal with all these financial issues. And I was there, and I think that was it. And we met.
Matt was there too.
Yeah, I said Matt, yeah. And then Mark came in the next day. Actually, Mark was the one who knew about this stabilization fund amendment. Mike had come up with the idea of this 20-year funding thing, doing it as an operating override, and we were concerned that if you just did it as a straight operating override, there'd be no way to control how you expended it. Mark knew about this amendment in the Municipal Modernization Act that allows you to restrict the use of it to certain items that are defined when you adopt the Municipal Stabilization Fund.
You're saying the third article?
Okay, so when we met with them, they discussed the problems they were having reducing their budget to 4%.
Yeah.
And it appears that they may not be willing or able, whatever, to reduce it to 4%, which means they would like a second override, a real operating override,
Right.
to create additional funding for their budget. And I told them, if you look at, I've given you a sheet that's a tax rate estimate sheet. Bill, since you're the only one left here, I think I may have an extra copy for you if you want to take a. This is the usual sheet that we pass out every year. And if you go to the right-hand corner down the bottom, and this is very preliminary, some of these budget figures are still in flux. But what I know now and what I think I know, if you appropriated all the amounts requested in the budget process this year, you would only have $68,000 left in free cash.
Well, put it a different way, this is showing we're almost $3 million above the Prop 2.5 limit, 2.8 million, right?
Without the use of free cash. Normally,
Right.
In the past, we've tried to restrict the use of free cash to 500,000,
Right.
plus we've been putting 200,000 for free cash into OPEB.
Right.
So if you.
But I'm looking at the 2.818, like that's
Yes.
where that's really the problem that we have. You can take the 500 off, that's
The 700,
2.3,
yes.
take the 200, it's 2.1. So we've got about a $2 million, $2+ million problem.
Yes, yeah, and that's that 2118 figure there.
Oh, yeah, okay. And does that?
'Cause I've taken
that
out
include
the-
special articles? Or is that just?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that includes everything. It includes estimates of new growth, estimates of local receipts,
I'm
state
talking about the
aid
cost
figures.
side. That- to
Well,
get
they
to
all
that
factor into the balance. When you take all your revenues and you take all your appropriations, subtract them, and that's where you get this.
But the
I didn't-
appropriations that you're talking about, what I'm asking about is, does it include money that Roberta's asking for an expansion of the COA?
No.
So it doesn't include the special article costs?
Any additional items, that's why I say these budgets are still in flux,
Yeah.
because they're still adding and subtracting items.
It includes some of the special article costs then?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And they were hoping to get $1 million additional override, 500,000. I said, hey, you've only got to cut 300,000, I got to cut $1 million too.
Right.
So, they said, well, if we could get our amount down to 500,000, could you get your amount down to 500,000? I said, I don't know.
Right. But I
You
mean,
know.
Mike, to be fair to you, Mike, your amount includes, like, the healthcare line item.
Yes.
School costs associated.
Yes.
And so it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, because we don't, this is one of the, when Mike brought this up, I had a hard time understanding the issue, because all of the town budgets we've seen have very modest increases.
Right.
Yes.
Actually, we're not
Yes.
adding 5 new cops, we're not, you know.
And I also deal with the revenue side, I can decide maybe to add that $100,000 to motor vehicle excise revenue, if it's doable. The assessors will put me down if they don't think that's realistic. I can, maybe add somewhat to interest. I started trying to put a list together, and before I give you this list, I want to make sure, and you have that list, but I want to make sure you read the first word. It's this,
Not sure which list you're talking.
Suggested?
suggested, yes,
Oh, yeah.
yes. Because I know you're not going to like some of these cuts, but I had to start somewhere. And that's only 500.
So I was mad at the warrant
20,000.
committee, about this. This is you, Mike?
And I'm only halfway there, I'm just, so. Here's another thing I want to show you, which kind of shocked me. I was really not prepared for this, but these are the health insurance budgets. I just got this afternoon. And the health insurance budget is up 9.13%. Now, why is that? If you take a look for the fiscal 19, which is the top sheet, if you go over and look down at the left-hand column, the fourth, the third one, MIIA, BCBC, HMO active, and look at the numbers for fiscal 19, 115 and 143. Go back 1 year and look at fiscal 18. It was 103 and 133.
Where are you at, Mike?
You have 20 new people.
So 22, yeah,
Oh, that's why I couldn't find those numbers.
second sheet. So we've added 22 people to the HMO since last year. And that's a big part of the reason that it's up. The other thing is the Insurance Advisory Committee is trying to put forward a high deductible plan. It hasn't been offered yet, so we don't know how many people are gonna sign up. So I was struggling to figure out how many people to budget for. And, first I put a higher figure, and then when I saw how bad the increase was, I said, well, I'm not sure that many people are gonna enroll. So I put I've got 9 and 6, I think.
That's in the Access Blue NE Saver.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So 9 and 7, so I've assumed 16 people are gonna join between the active and the retiree. And that adds, those last three figures, 126, 15, and 13.8, those are all the costs of that plan for the town. Normally, I carry $90,000 for new enrollees, because when teachers retire and new teachers are hired, or you hire new policemen, or the water department hires a new employee, if they sign up for health insurance, you have to have some funding to provide for that. I dropped that 90,000 because I said, well, I'm putting 150-some thousand for this new plan. Maybe that, between the two, that's going to be sufficient to cover new enrollees as well. But I don't know. it's a guesstimate. But it's the money that I thought I would be saving in health insurance from offering this low deductible plan ain't there because we've had so many new enrollees this past year. Why? I don't know.
Are they mostly new employees or employees
I don't know.
newly getting-
I've got to ask the payroll department to go through and try to let me know. I know we hired a bunch of new policemen this year. Schools hired a bunch of new people. And I know for next year, last night they said they were, in their budget, they're providing for 4 new positions for next year. And at this point, they have at least 3 retirees. So when you have a retiree and you replace them, the retiree doesn't go off the insurance, but the new person coming on is likely to come on, so. So it's, we have a $2 million problem right now, and the school committee doesn't seem to be willing to address it with other than an operating override.
Right, and so just one other thing on top of that, just to count this as my selectmen's report. So in connection with this discussion we've been having, I kind of revived something we've talked about from time to time, which is sort of town financial policies around this stuff, because my view of it is, if we're going to make this change with respect to capital and go ahead with an operating override, we've got to have an understanding going forward between the selectmen and the school committee about what future budgets are going to look like. So this is not, in the 2000s, we had, a series of operating overrides. I think there were 5 of them between 2006 and 2011, something like that.
Yeah.
5 and 6 years or something along those lines. Fairly substantial, $1,500,000, 2 kind of during the recession. And so if they're going to be getting a new base out of this operating override, I think we ought to have some agreement about what our policy is going to be, particularly with respect not only with the ongoing operating budgets and the use of this capital stabilization fund. Because I think realistically, from the school's perspective, given that most of the capital expenses are schools related, I think they have to get some assurance that the selectmen are going to be supportive going forward of continuing to fund the capital stabilization fund. Because obviously the first year vote is going to be a school related vote. But we need to have some assurance in terms of longer term financial planning about what's going to be happening with their budget, given its impact on the town. And then this is a concern that I have had and continue to have, and I think with respect to reserves and with respect to the policies around our OPEB contributions, that I think in the past there has been a little bit of a cavalier attitude towards free cash and reserves. And so I think we got to set some policies around the level of reserves that we want to maintain, particularly as we're looking ahead into the probability of some sort of a recession in the next 2 to 4 years. Ideally, we in the good times, which we're in now, we will have built up our reserves such that in the next recession, when state revenue to us drops, we can cover some of that shortfall for a year or 2 from our reserves rather than having to have an operating override then.
Yeah, I don't think we've been building up our reserves, have we, Mike?
No, and I think we
No,
should.
our free cash level actually has been going up slowly. It went
Yeah.
from about, I think, 2.2 million to almost
I
2.9
haven't
million.
seen us as being cavalier about free cash, but what's happened is the balance has gone up, so more of it's come out of it, which is not really.
It's not cavalier. I
Yes.
don't think we're being cavalier about free cash. I think
Yeah.
departments look at the level of free cash and
Oh.
say, there's money we can spend.
Oh, okay.
And there's money we can spend without having to have an operating override. Whereas my view is we ought to be, as much as possible, moving that money to other reserve accounts so that we get to the point where our general reserves, either in stabilization or free cash, are kind of between 7.5% and 10% of our overall budget, which is higher than 5% is sort of the minimum. But I think in a town like ours, with a purely residential tax base, way down on the pecking order in terms of getting aid from the state, that we ought to have more of a cushion rather than less. And so if we do have that downturn, we're not in a situation of saying we either have to have an operating override just to maintain services or lay a bunch of people off in the middle of a recession. And so that's
The hard part about that right now is that if we're moving in direction of things like with capital planning, trying to get on a more solid footing, if we're with regard to OPEB, we're trying to get on a more solid footing. When you're trying to bring all of your long-term financial flows into a more disciplined and healthy position, you're not really in a good spot to be building up your reserves at the same time unless you're prepared for a massive tax increase to go into all these, like non-gratifying expense
Right.
categories.
Well, and that's why I think if we're going, this is again, my personal view, if we're going to be having an operating override, it ought to be an honest operating override, right? It ought to be one that says this is what reflects the cost of providing the services you voted for yourselves and voted for ourselves, and not, that's also supplemented with a substantial contribution of free cash effectively to operations, right? So in other words, if you're using a lot of free cash, let's say you do a $500,000 operating override, because that sounds like a palatable number, but you're gonna have a $500,000 operating override, and you're gonna use $500,000 of free cash to fund that year's operating budget. Really, you needed $1 million operating override for
No,
those
I
services.
disagree, and here's why. This is when I first started with the warrant committee, that's the way I thought. What we do is we fund, and Mike, you can back me or tell me I've got this wrong, but what happens is we do not budget departments at the sparsest little minimal level it can be. What we actually do is we provide budgets where if a department needs something, they have the money to spend. But somehow or another, and I've never been in any other organization in my entire life that has been able to do this, if you don't need the money, don't spend it and let it drop back to free cash. So what happens is if you look from year to year, that free cash that's building up, it's either Mike being really magical with how he's squeezing it from the organization, but my point is, if you let departments have an adequate budget, and if they need the money, they spend it, but if they don't need the money, they don't, and they let it go back into the general fund, and it shows up at the end of the year as an increase in the free cash, then we're not actually burning, or we're not eating our seed corn. We just have an annual flow on the budget that provides money that if a department doesn't need it, sends it back to free cash, and we wind up with a balance in free cash that allows us to put that back in again.
I understand that, but to me, that's the 500,000. That what you're talking about is the 500. The amount on top of that, I mean, and that would all be well and good if we had an adequate set of reserves. Right? If we had reserves of 10% of our budget, then you could use free cash.
It's only 500,000 if only 500,000 drops the bottom line. We've had an increasing free cash balance.
And we've had
So it's
increasing
more than
usage of
500.
it.
Huh?
We've had increasing
Yeah,
usage of it
yeah,
as
and
well.
we've more, and if anything, I mean, we've been somewhere between $2 and $2.5 million after whatever we spend. That's kind of where I think we've been coming out for the past several years.
Right, and my all I'm saying is that if you add up the free cash and what we have in our various stabilization funds, it doesn't get us to a sufficient level of reserves. And our audits have been greatly benefited because Mike was wise enough to take the money from the state, right? So when our auditors look at our reserves, the auditors count the money that is in the fund that goes to pay down the debt on the schools, that money that earned the arbitrage.
Right. So
Now,
if you're
that
making,
goes away in 5 years, and so an auditor in 5 years is gonna say, whereas before, they look pretty good, because they've got this account that now has 7
Yeah,
million in it.
we had 18 million, we're down about 7 million.
so that may be an argument. It's not the free cash. It's that the reserve balances have been dropping. Now, that's a different argument. That one, I think,
No,
might
it's
have
the same
some
argument,
validity.
because I'm saying is the free cash, we ought to be appropriating it to reserves instead of appropriating it to operating expenses.
If
I understand what you're
if you can stop the appropriations to the operating budget to use that money for reserves, but I don't think that's a very difficult, it's easier said than done.
I understand.
Because
Everything is easier said than done.
yes, the history has been, I want it, now I don't care what it costs, and I'll send you the bill to pay for it. Although with some exceptions, I will say the town has been willing to vote a lot of debt exclusion overrides, and it's been very good about that. But the tendency, what do they say? The tendency, if you want to buy new furniture for the house or fix the plumbing, you're likely to get the new furniture.
Well, and a piece of that, though, is also that the taxpayers aren't going to see that unless it's explained well. It's kind of,
Yes.
People know what it is they're buying when they need something.
Well,
They don't know what they're,
And there's the elephant in the closet next year, too. People are gonna do their federal taxes next year and find out how much Uncle Sam is gonna take away from them because they no longer have the deductions for the federal and, for the
to see
property
that
tax.
cycle, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's really true in that first year, but maybe you're right.
It won't be true this year, but I think next year it will be. Given the fact that Normally, we collect 300,000 property tax in December. This year, we collected 3.9 million. I think people understand that next year they're.
Yeah, although,
Last time to take it.
yeah,
Yeah.
although I think the likely outcome is gonna be different, that people are gonna be surprised at how little difference it made, because the combination of the changes to the AMT and the reduction in the rates, they are overrepresented in Medfield, there's only a narrow slice of the population that's actually, if you pay, anyone who pays AMT,
Yeah.
is already not getting the benefit of those deductions.
Well, yeah, I
So,
understand.
but the number of people paying AMT is being reduced by 95%.
And some married couples will be okay because they get 24,000 standard deductions, and that might be enough, but.
Mike, how much are we getting turned back in by department heads every year?
I think we turned back almost $1 million. You know what doesn't turn back money? School department. They spent, we had one year, and this was before the current administration, one year they turned back $20,000. And they had a woman screaming at them that, why didn't you spend that money? You're giving that back to the town. That belongs to the schools, and you should have spent it. And that's what you get, if, everything that goes to them, you spend it and you don't turn it back. So.
And that's part of what I mean by the subsidy of
Well-
the departments turning back free cash are making more money available. If you're not sort of taxing to the appropriate level that lets you fund the operating budgets and the reserves. If we think that having the reserves are important, maybe you disagree, and that's fine, but.
No, I
then-
understand your point.
Then you're sort of, again, you're kicking the can down the road. Like, at some point, the music stops, and you don't have that free cash. Whereas you might like to have $4 million in free cash 2 years from now, because then you wanna spend $1.5 million, right? So to plug a gap without having to either hit the taxpayers or lay people off.
It'll catch up with you eventually,
Right.
so.
And that's kind of the thinking that I had around putting some policies to this, that the school committee would agree to, we would agree to, that would at least say, this is directionally where we're going, this is the kind of growth that you're gonna try to deliver in the budget going forward. So this is not override 1 of 7, but this is the override we're gonna do, and we're gonna be at this level. Obviously, they can't promise forever, but we can comfortably be at this level for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and have some predictability.
I'm skeptical of the short-run ability to do that, because I was at the public meeting, that school committee meeting at the high school auditorium, and I think I heard one school committee member mention that, well, actually, we have a structural problem with our budget that we'll have to deal with next year. So having a good discussion this year on operating override's probably not gonna get you
I think
committed for
they've
next year.
concluded that they're gonna fix the structural problem this year. I think that, let's put it this way, if they have a structural problem, we gotta fix it this year, my view, rather than next year. But look, I mean, all we can do, ultimately town meeting and the voters can decide, but all we can do is try to explain the consequences of those decisions and put forward a responsible proposal for dealing with it, and, ultimately, the people are gonna decide, and we have to, I think, put something there that is understandable, so that they actually, the people, who I think people will understand the circumstances, and,
So Mike, two things. I think you're right, Mike, except that I think we're gonna have to be really thoughtful about how those decisions get presented for the town meeting. This list of cuts, some of these, some of them I actually think affect what we're trying to get done, like maybe the townwide master plan. Having a townwide master plan that's already been delayed for a couple of years, that gets funded at a minimal level in this next year, basically says we're gonna delay yet another year before we get real. But some of the others, like, let's say, the rail trail, that's an expenditure that's clearly a discretionary expenditure, that feels to me like, well, either what we're saying is, no, we're not gonna do it, and it's not, it's just not in the budget, or it is in the budget, but it probably has to show up as an override, if you can't get the 2 million out.
Or you have to wait a few years and, it maybe that's a want and not a need.
Well, but who decides that? I think.
Ultimately, the town meeting, but, the problem I'm dealing with this year is it seems like everybody thinks the recession's over, we can have whatever we want now. So we're getting all these requests, 50 million for school,
Yeah.
$1.5 million for addition to the senior center, 8 to 10 million for a park and rec building, new positions all over town, from council on aging, IT department, school department, the health insurance budget is up 9%. The pension budget is up 10%. And as you think about the discussion we had earlier tonight on the building department, part of the problem is the state has tied our hands so much. You want to raise revenue from the building permit structure, which is certainly a legitimate thing. They say you can't do it because it's a tax, and they control taxes. You want to, you've got some major projects in your water department coming along. You want to sell more water. The state says you can't use more water. You can only sell so much. So what's the alternative? You have to raise the water rates. Every time you try to get something done, the state is there saying, no, you can't do it this way. And that's the big part of the problem. We can only deal with the expenditure side because they tie our hands on the revenue side so much. And so you're begging from an agency that doesn't care. I mean, the state really doesn't care. They care more about the Patriots and the Red Sox than they care about the cities and towns for whatever reason. It's probably political, and I'm sure it is political, but you're starving for money and they're throwing it at them.
What I'm trying to visualize is how some of the items on this list, not necessarily all of them, but some of the items on this list look to me like items that will be on an article at the town meeting. They will have a price tag associated with them. They are not part of the sub-Prop 2.5 budget. So I'm trying to visualize, so maybe schools wants their own operating override. I'm trying to picture how some of these might go. Let me pick the one that I'm, putting all the time and effort into, the ALS budget. It's entirely possible that nobody wants to spend any money on that. In which case, there's no ALS capability. But I'm assuming that's one that there will be an option for people to look at to get the argument for here's what the price tag is for the option if you want it, and they're going to have to make that decision. I'm trying to figure out how many do we have a list of 8 operating overrides, or do we have a set of articles that say here's an article asking for this. If you are in favor of it, this constitutes an approval of an operating override to be voted on. Because there may be 5 or 6 of these that are going to need that kind of wording.
Well, the way I put that, that gets too confusing for people. They have what you call, what do they call that, a laundry, a what?
Menu.
No, what do they
There is
call
a way
it when
you can-
when
yeah,
you
there's
get
a way you can-
Multiple overrides.
multiple override? You pick and choose. It's like a laundry list. You pick what you choose. The problem with that is you get all the goody things funded and things that, and then you don't have a balanced budget.
Or you get
Well,
nothing.
no, not as an operating override you do. So if you pick from what I'm getting at is I'm trying to visualize how these decisions get presented to the voters at the town meeting.
The way I'm suggesting is you have a list that totals $1 million or whatever you decide we need to make the override.
Yeah.
And this list, and it's the cuts, or the additions are made to those budgets. So
Yeah,
if
but
you
the-
decide you want
the-
to add 200,000 to the school budget, you would have school department budget 200,000. If you decide you want to put $10,000 to the Council on Aging budget, you'd add you'd line
Yeah, but the
item.
problem with that is the sequencing.
Is
So
what?
if it was just a question of do you want to give the schools 250,000 or 500,000 or 750,000, the rules are whichever one gets the required majority, it'll go up to that level.
Well,
But
somebody,
here you can't do that because it's a Chinese menu kind of thing.
well, I assume somebody could get up on town meeting floor and move to amend the school amount to raise it to 600,000 or 800,000. And then you would have to decide what you wanted to lower to get it down to
I'm
$1
less
million.
worried about those than some of these. I'm just trying to visualize how assuming that between the warrant committee and the town in general, we can't fit these things that you're cutting out, we can't fit them under the existing budget. I'm saying some of them, I think, actually are articles that do have money associated with them. It's just that they don't fit under the existing budget. So effectively, they're overrides,
Well,
if people want them.
those that have separate articles, you would recommend dismissal. Because anything you contain on that list is a contingent appropriation. It only gets voted if the voters at the polls approve an override.
Right.
So,
I mean, at some level, then, the motion on the operating override article will change depending on the outcomes of the other votes.
yes.
Right, and I think that's what Gus is getting at, that if you vote for the ALS article and it's $200,000, that would then get added to the amount for the operating.
Well, so there would just be a single vote for an operating override that would have some conglomeration of all of the different articles, schools and otherwise.
Yes.
People would then vote on,
the town
so it's an all or
meeting-
nothing in the vote.
The town meeting does not vote an override.
Yeah.
That's just, so they're gonna just pass the budget and any extra items.
Right.
Either on a contingent basis or an outright basis, whichever way you choose to do it. And then that determines what happens if the override doesn't pass. Whether you have to come back to a special town meeting to subsequently balance the budget, because you have to balance the budget before the state will allow you to set the tax rate.
So what I'm getting at is, let's for a second here say the schools ask for $500,000. Let's go with your ALS of 200,000. Let's say all the other stuff gets voted down. The schools get approved for 500,000 because there's one bunch of people that want that. There's a slightly different bunch of people that want the ALS. So both of those get approved. It goes to an election for $700,000. The people who want the schools didn't want 700,000, they wanted 500,000 for the schools. The people who wanted the 200,000 didn't want 700,000. So it's like it's an all or nothing proposition if it's set up that way, and that doesn't seem.
You're saying you don't have enough money after you pass the
I'm saying you don't
override?
have enough options for people to
No,
basically vote for what they actually want.
He wants each item to
You
be
can
a
have each
separate
item
override vote.
as a
Yeah,
separate
I'm
override.
asking
and
the
then-
question, I'm
you
trying to
Can't do
visualize
it
this.
that, there's an IG from DOR, it's it's like 28 pages. Goes through all this, gives you various scenarios and samples for doing it different ways. So there's the accepted
Yeah.
alternative ways of doing it.
I'm just trying to picture it. I'm not trying to argue for anything, I'm
No,
just
so
trying
it's-
to picture
It's
it
a
right now.
document that's worth looking at.
You-
I think in the discussions with the school committee folks, I mean, their preference is to have it be a single number. And so if some amount is needed for the town side and some amount is needed on the school side, it would just be a single number that would cover both. That was what their original.
You're saying they wouldn't give the choice to town meeting, they would leave the choice up to the school department and
No, it would be left up to town meeting, but there'd only be a single over, as opposed to having
So for the
override one for
election,
the
the
schools.
election would be a
overrides-
single number melding the schools in with whatever other things showed up.
Right. And it would be in a contingent article like this, meaning if the override failed, this money wouldn't be appropriated. So you wouldn't, that would
Yes,
prevent you from
that's
having to
right,
go
yeah.
back and have another town meeting. So,
yes.
Obviously, we have some time to sort that out.
It's a lot to digest, it
Yeah,
really
yeah,
is.
it's,
And there is no perfect answer, no matter what you're gonna do, it's gonna be, some people will disagree with how you put it in there. And that's why I put suggestion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certain ones, like the townwide master plan, if there's no funding for that, I'm very concerned about. I mean, it could cost us more to do nothing in the big picture than to do that.
You're concerned
So
about that, Mike was concerned about cutting the 80,000 out of OPEB.
I am too.
Somebody else is concerned about the cutting the outreach program. Somebody may be concerned about that.
Right.
Somebody may be concerned about cutting the unemployment.
As a Tree City person, I'm a little concerned about the trees. It's only 7,000, but I just wanna,
tough luck with that one.
just saying,
Oh, you can
going
pine.
for the 6th year.
You can pine away on that one.
Oh.
He's still got it, ladies and gentlemen, at 10:30 at night.
So we need a motion then to open the annual town meeting warrant for adding these articles.
Oh, Jesus.
So I would move that we open the annual town meeting warrant to, do I need to read out each of these articles? To add.
Does that mean we are in favor of these articles, or just merely this is
Just
an
opening them and put them on.
Administrative thing to add them to the warrant.
And these can be changed before the warrant goes to print.
And this
then
is
we-
also not,
Meeting next week.
this is not voting to put these override questions on the ballot either. So we still
Right.
retain the right
Right,
to
no,
decide
I
put
just,
questions on the
given
ballot.
our lengthy discussion, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, second.
So-
Have you finished?
Any further discussion? All
You don't
those,
need to read them, I will include them as.
You'll
as
include them,
part-
yeah.
I will include them.
all those in favor?
Aye. And then I would move now that we close the warrant. Having added those
Sure, you don't.
uncontroversial, simple
We're meet-
articles.
We're meeting next week, Mike. Let's give people a chance to be creative.
Is there a second to that?
You could get 10 more articles
Second.
and proposing 10 different solutions.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're also asked to vote to sign the Green Communities contract as recommended by Jerry McCarty, Facilities Manager.
I move that we vote to sign the Green Communities contract as recommended by Jerry McCarty.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. And we're asked to vote to sign Massachusetts School Building Authority document for Ralph Wheelock School Boiler Project as requested by Superintendent Marsden.
I think I saw it.
It just came in today, that's why it's in red.
But what is,
It's
what
the
is it
final
at?
payment.
Yeah.
So this is asking them to give us
Yeah.
the final payment.
And
And
incidentally,
Mike, does that go back in the reserve fund that that other stuff came
it
from?
goes
or-
back into that interest account.
It goes back in, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of this was funded by a grant from School Building Assistance for an accelerated repair program. And then part of it was from the interest account
Yeah,
for the,
All right, so I move that we sign the MSBA document for the Ralph Wheelock School Boiler Project as requested by Dr. Marsden.
Second.
All those in favor? Yep. And then discussion of the assignment of the annual town meeting warrant articles. Is that something we need to do tonight, given the hour?
probably not at this point.
Suggest we defer it.
Much out of it.
Do we even know what those articles are?
Let's try to
We're
defer
coming back
everything.
next week, right? We're back in here next
Do
week?
we have to do anything with the pending items tonight?
I don't think so.
Well, you already did the annual appointments for the Board of Health, so you took one off your pending list.
There we
so
go.
I can remove
I-
that one now.
Were there other annual appointments that we didn't deal with?
I don't
I don't
think
No, I
remember.
think the Board of Health was the only one else.
Okay.
it's done.
The one thing I would just raise,
Members are staggered. And members of the Board of Health, and they're not up for reappointment right now.
quickly is just with respect to the committee process revision. I got Gus's comments, maybe we could put that on our agenda for next week, because if we were agreed on it,
Yeah.
I think we ought to promulgate it and let the committees know that this
Yep.
is how they have to do it.
I had one other item that should be on pending items probably, which is the Lot 3 RFP. So if we don't have it on this one, I would add it. And informationally, Mark, I'd ask Sarah Raposa to request a formal position from the Conservation Commission on the movability of that catch basin that's open, and the
I
issue.
think the sense is they're gonna require a filing, a formal filing.
I would like a formal position from the Conservation Commission on that one issue.
Which my understanding is the Conservation Commission's gonna require the town to make a formal filing for an ANRAD with them, as opposed to just saying, hey, do it informally. I don't, if they
Okay,
will
let's talk,
find.
so let's keep that on, let's not talk tonight, but
Are we
I don't even
going-
know,
are we
I'm not sure I know
going
what
to
it
meet
is you
early-
said.
Are we gonna meet earlier next week to talk about that RFP? There was some suggestion
And
to
if you
do
want to.
that.
I'm available,
To meet like before 7?
yeah,
Oh, that's fine,
yeah.
yeah.
The whole board?
Well,
Well,
just Gus and I.
Pete's,
This would be, otherwise Pete has to stand in that corner for like
Rather than
half an
making
hour.
Pete stand over there, we could Gus and I
Happy
could
not
meet
to come
early.
early.
And then I have to post it, so just let me know
Yeah.
what time you're
What
meeting.
time?
so I'll
would you
have to
just
post it.
let Sarah know too, please, that they're available to meet earlier?
Yeah, because we don't have an Affordable Housing Trust meeting next week, so.
Nope.
So are we targeting 6 or what time?
6 is fine.
6? 6 o'clock,
Whatever works for you guys.
that's fine.
Get
Yep,
that right in the calendar.
that's good.
Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as set forth on the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Having done that, the one question I had is the third one around the Medfield Community Service Day. Was there anything that we actually needed to permit there? I mean, I'd like to encourage it, and,
Sometimes they do it on town land that we control, so I
Okay.
don't know, they use the gazebo, I don't know if
I
that's.
just wasn't
think
sure
that's
what it was we
under our-
were permitting. other
It's
than-
not signage, I know that.
No signage.
They just said to hold it.
I'll have to ask. It came in while I was gone, so I'll double check
I
with
think it's
Evelyn,
more
but I
of
think it's,
just kind of a vote of support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm guessing. I
And
mean, the
sometimes they-
UCC Church does a Mission
Right.
Possible every November, and they don't ask for permission, they just do it.
Originally, the first year, we're asking for more active involvement
Okay,
than frankly I was comfortable with our providing.
okay.
But I think they also do request projects that they can do from Park and Rec and otherwise.
Okay.
So they
On the informational stuff, if we're there yet.
Well, we're doing the town administrator
Okay,
update first.
Okay, yep.
Anything there? Okay, selectmen's reports.
Yeah.
nothing else for you tonight, Mike?
no, you did.
I've set it up.
Don't do puns.
Oh, yes.
Just quickly on the 41 Dale Street, which was originally
make
on
a
our
few
agenda for
punches
next
or-
Tuesday. The Affordable Housing Trust Board met before today. There are still some additional pieces of information that board members have requested from Mr. Kelly, and he's going to provide it, and we are going to reconvene on March 13th. And this LIP is going to be on our agenda on March 20th. And so I had hoped it would be resolved on the 6th, but in the meeting today, which was reasonably well attended by the public, there were just some follow-up. He's going to make some changes on the number of parking spots that he's providing on the location, and we'll reconvene, and we will vote our recommendation on the 13th, and then we'll meet on the 20th. So,
Is the number of units still at 36?
36.
And I think the only thing I have, the ALS Study Committee meeting on Thursday night. The last meeting that we had, Tom Marie, I think you're all aware, given he's got multiple positions, he's on the warrant committee, he's on the bargaining committee, and he was on the ALS committee, he basically said, trying to meet those three responsibilities puts me in conflict with myself, actually, and so he basically has stepped down from the ALS Study Committee. So the reason I bring that up is that the actual charter for that committee included having a warrant committee representative on it. My recommendation at this point, if you both are okay with it, would be not to replace Tom on the committee. I think he still will show up for some meetings, but not as a committee member. Next Thursday night, we have Jack Wolf coming. Jack actually had communicated with me a challenging viewpoint around the cost of ALS, which I shared with the committee, and Tom delivered it. He read Jack's message, but Jack is going to come in and face the committee. So the committee was not happy about the lack of financial support, but basically I wanted the committee to hear that because the committee needs to be prepared to address the financial question with the recommendation that they're coming up with. So Jack will go into the Lion's Den on Thursday and make his case. Tom had told the committee as of the last meeting that it was an informal comment, but that not most, but not all of the warrant committee members are against recommending any funding for this option. So it's a decision that the taxpayers will have to make at the town meeting, probably, unless the finances change around, turn around a lot. And I think that's, you knew about the senior survey. I think that's all the mischief I've been up to in the last 3 weeks
Okay.
that I can remember.
I'll just remind residents that if you want to recognize a volunteer, the Volunteer Awards, Medfield Foundation Volunteer Awards nomination period ends on the 28th, so you've got another day or two. Informational items to cover? Chris, Mike?
No, I don't think we have anything.
Okay.
I had just a couple of quick comments. One, I noticed the Department of Agricultural Resources regarding the apiary program in the 5th grade Girl Scout through 88, 92, doing this program on bees, it seemed to me that we ought to try to get that information to them on the chance that that's at all relevant or helpful. And then the other question, do we have an ADA coordinator?
Any
We have
what?
that Mass Office on Disability hold an inaugural statewide ADA coordinator meeting. Do we have one?
There's an,
I'm the
think it's
chairman,
you.
and Anna's on it, and I think,
Tina Cosentino,
there's-
maybe?
the what?
Tina Cosentino, is she on it?
Yes, Tina Cosentino, yeah.
I think we appointed that committee guest back in, I think that's on the list, right? I think that's one of the lists of.
They must have blown by me as one of the 104.
And
And
actually,
then the last comment I had, I don't know if we would ever do this, but the Comcast Verizon report on complaints I thought was good. It didn't have very many complaints. It occurred to me we should think about sending them a
It's
thank.
actually required by our license
I know,
agreement.
I know. But it occurred to me we ought to send them a thank you note for their good service based on their complaint.
Really? Okay.
Well, I mean, if you look at, there weren't very many complaints and the complaints were resolved quickly. I'd say you track
That's
more.
because people gave up trying to get through them.
I think on some of that, as I recall,
We're all still on hold, right?
they.
Let the record show a motion was made and it was not seconded. All right. All right. I get it.
I had to recuse myself anyway, so I would.
On some of them, they aggregated the complaints,
Oh,
so if there was a failure of the system, instead of 10,000
I'm
complaints,
just
they'd
all
have
for good
one.
business relationships when the opportunity presents itself.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Excellent. We're adjourned.